Okay, we're live. So good morning, everybody. So today we have a small free school, but I'm looking forward to our discussion. And today we'll continue where we left off last week, talking about democracy and our stage of democracy and new theory. And today we'll discuss the possibilities of a democratic, non-violent seizure of power by the people, and where we are in our thinking about this. So I'll ask Doc to start the discussion.
Thank you very much, Sambarta. Yeah, we want to, hopefully, this could be the beginning of our research and discussion about paths to a new democracy, people's democracy, as envisioned by Du Bois and King in particular. I want to make it very clear because people get it very confused. You say the word democracy, they think you're talking about liberalism, or liberal democracy, or bourgeois democracy. We are not talking about that. If there's anybody listening on the live stream, that is not what we're doing. What we're talking about is democracy in its generic sense of the rule of the people. But we'll get to all of that. But the question of democracy is the topic of wide discussion throughout the ruling class, because there is a sense, and the more intelligent of them, there is a sense that democratic institutions are in a crisis of legitimacy, that the rule of the people has been subverted by oligarchs and kleptocrats, people who use the state for stealing, and by a wide cadre of just pure opportunists who will serve any interest as long as they get paid. In the realm of the bourgeois or ruling elite, you would be hard pressed to find a woman, a man of principle, of decency, courage is not even a part of their character. David Brooks has been writing on these matters, and he's, I think, and Shantanu and I were just talking about this, and I think we agree that he is a sober-minded chronicler of this crisis of the elites. But we'll come back to him. But what we're talking about is a revolutionary democracy as necessary and in a lot of ways an inevitability in a time of a crisis like this. It doesn't take rocket science or to be an acute observer to see that the political system is in an existential crisis. Both of the ruling parties have lost whatever legitimacy and support they had from the masses. Tens of millions of people have literally withdrawn from so-called democratic processes, and so on. So in the landscape of ideas about democracy and how to resolve the crisis, there's the liberal social democratic camp, which are kind of overlapping, although not the same. And Osita, who we spoke about last week, is a part of them, the liberal social democratic wing, as a theorist. But then you have the radical leftists and anarchists who say, in effect, while the liberals and social democrats are seeking structural changes in the electoral system, in the governing systems, such as doing away with the Senate, from the electoral point of view, doing away with the electoral college, giving statehood to Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. The Puerto Rico question is another question because why not give independence to Puerto Rico? But those are the types of things that they're looking at. They would propose radical changes in the Democratic Party, which would create more space for people like Mamdani, perhaps, or AOC. The anarchists and radical leftists reject it all. It's part, and has always been a part of their theorizing and activism, that democracy for them is reformism. To speak about democracy means to lower the bar in the struggle for socialism. And in other words, if you are not shouting socialism every day, and if you do not see the objective of revolutionary struggle to be socialism, then you are a reformist, a liberal reformist, a bourgeois reformist. It's so ridiculous because, the Communist Manifesto is not about communism. It is the manifesto of the Communist Party. So it's not talking about what socialism or even communism would look like. What it is a manifesto of democracy, of radical democratic change. But these way far leftists have rejected the democratic struggle as reformism, holding the working class back, etc. And that, in large measure, explains why Trotskyites to the person, not to mention these wild anarchists, have always demeaned and diminished Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement, or what we call the Third American Revolution. Then you have the populist nationalists, the Stephen Bannons of the world, who talk a better game than they're able to deliver on, and they're better talkers than they are theoreticians and thinkers. And, two of the people that we'll talk about in a little while, what are their names now?
Curtis Yarvin.
Yarvin and
Rufo, Christopher
and Rufo. These two who fall within the broad umbrella of populist nationalism. Well, we can already say, one of them, Yarvin, is calling for a return to monarchy in 2025. And I guess also feudalism and sharecropping, if not slavery. This is who we deal with. And Rufo, he goes around the country from red states or Republican-run states and talks about doing away with DEI programs, which is only a symbolic thing, because the real thing is he wants to put Black people back in our place. And this is huge. And it is a psychological predisposition of white people in trouble. But what's his name? Popular national Bannon. He again talks a lot. But the history of liberalism or liberal democracy goes back to the Enlightenment, the 17th century, and we were going back and forth, will of all, will of the people, the general will of the will of all concept. But nonetheless, these ideas can be found in John Locke, his treatise on government, and later in Rousseau and the French Revolution, that each of them, in different ways, using different epistemologies, uphold a kind of social contract, which is inscribed in law. And that's really one of the achievements of the bourgeois revolutions, to establish a system based upon law, equality before law, that law was bigger than any man or woman, that and to have thus eliminated the personal or divine leader. And this was a great achievement. But to even talk about that, you have to also acknowledge what else was going on besides their theory of democracy and the rule of law. There was the slave trade and plantation slavery. Certainly, John Locke was a part of the the African Trading Company, a company that was involved in the transatlantic slave trade, while proclaiming democracy. The American Revolution was in a lot of ways, an independence movement, a movement to establish an American sovereign state. And that's why the questions of taxation and the legal system of the United States. And in this regard, the American Revolution did what the English Revolution did not do. It established a constitution, a supreme law. In Britain, they don't have a constitution. The French Revolution, following upon the American example, has a constitution. The difference is that it's very easy to change the French constitution. It is almost impossible, or close to impossible, to change the American Constitution. So a new constitution can come with a new regime, as it were. So after World War II, a new constitutional system is established in France, which was different from what they call, my French is not that good, the ancien regime, the ancient regime. Is that good? Yeah, did I pronounce it right?
Oh, seamless.
Oh, thank you. When I speak French, I put a little more bass in my voice, Better known as the old regime. The old regime could have been the monarchy, it could have been the first constitution after the revolution, or it could have been the regime, compromise regime that came in the 1820s when a form of monarchy was brought back. Or it could have been the Napoleonic Code, which was also, but anyway, in the United States, it's this sense that the law that came with the American Revolution is an eternal document. The French see it in more practical terms. What the American Revolution did not bring forward, but the English and French revolutions did, the concept of a social contract. We do not have that concept in the United States, because even more than the British, we defer to the individual. There's perhaps never been a nation so that so values the rights of the individual, even to the extent of doing away with the state itself, and that government and law have a very limited function, and it is to protect the individual or to allow the individual opportunity. And that has a lot to do with why, in the United States, we don't talk about classes. Or when I say we, the consensus narrative doesn't talk about classes. It talks about the middle class. And the middle class is not only an economic category like in Europe, but it is a thing of values. You are middle class because not only have you accessed opportunity and so on, but you have accessed opportunity because you have the right values. And that was always the hit against Black people. Black people were unequal in all ways to white people, is because of our lack of middle class values. I mean, I'm trying to speak in a very calm way, because you could just break out into cursing. It's so egregious and evil. But anyway, but the concept of a social contract, and hence the will of all, the general will, etc. What is the general will? How do you serve the general will? That is not an American social thought, political thought. It kind of snuck in during the Great Depression and the New Deal, where for the first time, a government which attempted to solve social problems as social and not individual problems. But then, after the French and British, after Rousseau and Locke and John Stuart Mill later, we have the Marxist and then Lenin's point of view. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, I was saying this, I think, to Shantanu and Emily. The Communist Manifesto is the program, the manifesto, the creed of the Communist Party. It is not a call to establish communism. It is a call to establish democracy, universal right to vote, universal education, and a social contract which committed the rulers to serve the people. It was radical democracy. Lenin takes from Marx and Engels, and he talks about the achievement of state power as part of the process of democratizing society. It's very close to the way we look at things. However, Lenin and Marx are incomplete, as we've said before. They're dealing in different circumstances, but they're dealing with the question of European revolutionary history, going back in particular to the French Revolution. I think I mentioned this before, Lenin writes this article called The Three Sources and Three Component Parts of Marxism. And it is British political economy, classical German philosophy, meaning Kant and Hegel, and the concepts of class struggle or revolutionary struggle that they get from the French, Rousseau, but also others that were direct participants in the French Revolution. But the way they're looking at the world is from the standpoint of the European struggle. And I guess what was going on here confounded them to no end. In fact, when certain very prominent followers of Karl Marx come to the United States, especially Joseph Wiedemeyer, he proclaims loudly and proudly that the slaves are not a part of the class struggle, and that the class struggle, in effect, was a white affair, which shows how a Marxian logic, at least for that time, could not lead to anything but a capitulation to white supremacy. Wiedemeyer comes over here in the 1830s, which means he was here during the time of enslavement. But the slaves were tangential to the class struggle. That remains with us. That idea is very, you can find it in a lot of social democrats. They'll put window dressing on by saying, well, but we fight racism, but class struggle is something different. I experienced that a lot, where you would get white people who were workers and into the class struggle, and they would, for the sake of virtue signaling, I guess, say, well, we're anti-racist, but the real struggle is the class struggle, which then put them in a very uncomfortable position in relationship to the civil rights movement. You see how that works out. But Marxism, Leninism has never been able to answer the question of democracy in the United States and how to achieve it, how to achieve state power. But then there is Du Bois. I consider Du Bois and Martin Luther King to be two principal thinkers about democracy. Of course, Du Bois's Black Reconstruction in America is so important to the understanding of the logic and processes of the struggle for democracy in the United States. And what makes it just so beautiful is that he looks at democracy from the standpoint of the most oppressed, the most exploited, the Black worker. And he proposes radical solutions that no one before him or since have proposed, and that is the dictatorship of the Black proletariat. As a paradigm, a model of radical democracy, and which would have made the South the most democratic part of the country. The counter-revolution against Reconstruction made the South, once again, the most reactionary part of the country. But Du Bois's thinking was that to achieve democracy where there had never been any, and then the ruin of slavery and civil war, it would require a radical dispensation. And that was the dictatorship of the proletariat. Now, of course, Du Bois is learning not just from bourgeois democracy or the French Revolution, but also from the Russian Revolution. That's what makes him such a consequential scientist. He did not come with, well, I'm not going to look at that because that is a dictatorship or that's Stalin or whatever. No, he was learning from all of it. And so he takes the concept from Lenin, I guess, of the dictatorship of the proletariat. The difference is he called for, in at least 3 states, the dictatorship of the Black proletariat. In several other states, if you look at the way he studies them, he says in states where there was still a white majority, but a sizable and important Black population. That's something more like a compromise, but nonetheless a radical democracy, starting with the poor white and poor Black. That's what he was thinking. Of course, Martin Luther King, and Emily will further tease this out for us, always and explicitly, once there were civil rights laws passed, called for a new democracy. Mm-hmm. A new democracy. Mm-hmm. In this regard, Du Bois is learning, by the way, from Frederick Douglass. Mm-hmm. He is learning from John Brown. And in the 20th century, it's Henry Winston who attempts to pull all of these pieces together, the Russian Revolution and the anti-slavery struggle. You know, and his very important essay, which I know Serafina has read and talked about, from the anti-slavery to the anti-monopoly struggle. Another way it could be read, and I think a more accurate way, from the anti-slavery to the anti-imperialist struggle. Where Winston, in my mind, was the first to try to synthesize Lenin and Du Bois. But King and Du Bois were the first theorists of democracy who talked, maybe not the first American theorists of democracy that talked about democracy in the midst of a deep political crisis in the country. For us, it is a political and civilizational crisis, and the things falling apart, as it were, and the struggle for the power of the people. But the revolutionary Democrats included in the 20th century Sun Yat-sen, Mahatma Gandhi, Mao Zedong, Ho Chi Minh, Kwame Nkrumah, the African National Congress, the Black Panther Party. Mm-hmm. Their call for all power to the people was a call for radical democracy. Mm-hmm. Now, for us, building upon our discussions with Lawson, James Lawson, which, you know, I'm so glad we were able to have those discussions. The question of, is there a nonviolent theory of the seizure of state power, or can there be a nonviolent path to the seizure of state power by the people? Well, I'm kind of the opinion that in the Chinese situation, the emperor left, he abdicated, which meant that there was no resistance to the people taking power. It was pretty much the same thing in Russia, where the Tsar abdicated, he left. So the next question is, what would state power look like? What would democracy look like going forward? And therefore you got the struggle between the more liberal social democrats and the Bolsheviks. And the Bolsheviks took a stance for democracy, for the redistribution of land, and for peace. And that was a very courageous position they took, but it seemed that that position reflected the will and aspirations of the majority of people. In each case, the Russian Revolution and in the first Chinese Revolution, they were peaceful. The difficulty in China comes with after Sun Yat-sen's death, and that struggle between the communists and the nationalists. But Ho Chi Minh, the same thing. Independence, anti-colonial independence, anti-colonial struggle is not just to establish a new bourgeois regime, but a democracy of the people. Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, and the ANC, as I mentioned. Now, we in the free school want to study this more and more, because it's not like this is something 20 years down the road. This is upon us as we speak. The disintegration of the state, the lack of legitimacy of all of the major institutions of the society, including universities and such. So we want to study this, but we want to study it also in the throes of a civilization crisis. We want to study it from the standpoint of these 5 things that I've mentioned a couple of times: the industrialization, the cost of empire, the crisis of governance, the civilization and moral crisis, which is huge when you listen to some of these hotheads and nuts. They lack any moral anything. We'll talk about them. But this, and then the crisis of knowledge. So 5 things, we can go back to that. It is a complete, almost total crisis of a system. You know, and the state, this is what is so interesting. The state is so weak that it cannot rescue the civilization. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
They cannot rescue the civilization. But the crisis of the civilization affects the disintegration and crisis of the state.
Right.
And then deindustrialization has so impoverished the masses of people that they are not prepared to accept any of the programs or leaders from the establishment or from the state. And then, of course, the collapse of the universities. I think this is bigger than we know. It is tied intimately to the crisis of civilization, because civilizations are held together not so much by force of arms, but by ideas and values. Now we want to see how Black folk play into this. And I think it'll be interesting. David Brooks has an essay in the New York Times up now, but he's had one last week. But this one deals with white nihilism. Interesting term, isn't it? These groups of young white men, I guess in their 40s, maybe a little older, 30s and 40s, for whom everything has failed. There is no American dream. There is no upward mobility. Whiteness and a wage for whiteness are no longer functioning for us. And if whiteness ain't working, the world must have come to an end. You know, these nihilists who have a lot of, it seems, or more cultural and academic capital than they deserve. But that's because they have rich Silicon Valley techs, you know, keeping money flowing to them. They are pessimistic and nihilism. A nihilist is worse than a pessimist. A nihilist is one who sees only darkness and is prepared to destroy everything because he or she sees no way out. A pessimist maybe is a more mild-mannered nihilist, I guess we could say. But this nihilism, and Brooks is alarmed by it. He sees a major part of it, and this is why Albert and Jeremiah so valuable in the discussion group at Lucian Blackwell, because y'all know the Bible better than everybody. It's really deep. They know the Bible even better than the preacher in the free. They know their stuff, man. And, what was I? But see, the collapse of white gods, which we talked about. You can call it the collapse of religion, but I think it's better to talk about as a collapse of white gods, white values, and of course, whiteness as the ultimate, But it's so interesting reading David books and then listening to Rufo and Yarvin, these two people. Yarvin wants to return to a monarchy, and Rufo wants to literally go back to a form of Plessy v. Ferguson. You talking about dirt bags, man.
Wow.
And in their quote debate, I think it was Yarvin that said, "Didn't you know Nelson Mandela was a communist? Martin Luther King was a communist?" You know what I'm saying? They ain't got to Du Bois yet, but Du Bois was a communist. I guess to them I would say, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called communists." But this is, I guess, Brooks calls it nihilism. This is something, this is a form of illness, psychological illness, and it's based upon the idea that whiteness in the country and worldwide has collapsed. That it's the fault of the anti-slavery movement and the civil rights movement. That why didn't we see, or Yarvin is saying to Rufo, what, you didn't know that Martin Luther King was a communist, so you're supporting communism now? Isn't that interesting, that logic? I mean, these are nutcases. Or didn't you know Nelson Mandela was a communist? And see, in each case, the struggle against white supremacy or apartheid was the way they see it, an anti-white movement led by Black people. And hence this notion of revenge for y'all having stood up and fought for freedom. It's hard to digest that people would speak this way, but in a sense it's good for them to speak this way because now you know. And we're right. It is the Black proletariat that is the central force of the fight for a revolutionary democracy. How that will occur, we have to think about, we should think about. There is no easy recipe to say how the trajectory of this will go. There is not a Black person, I know there's one or two here there, there's hardly a Black person who would not react viscerally and with hatred towards views that these people are talking about. Which means that on any measure, Black people in their vast majority believe in democracy, but in a new democracy and in a revolutionary democracy. You don't have to do a lot of explaining to Black folk on this matter. Whereas in the white situation, you'd be trying to explain for the next 2 years or maybe more why this is necessary. overwhelmingly, Black people see the connection of democracy and civilization. They see the world through their gods, through their ideas of perfection, of what is good, of what is beautiful, of what is truthful, of what is freedom. And this is, and I just want to use Lucian Blackwell as a case study of this. I mean, if we didn't know what goes on at Lucian Blackwell every Tuesday is a robust affirmation of the very things that I'm saying. These are people we've just met, but there is no disagreement about anything. Maybe Booker T. Washington, and that's white, but I mean, but generally, we all agree about everything, and it's just deepening and perfecting what we know or what we're learning. It's not a matter of opposition or resistance. So I use Lucian Blackwell. Now, of course, it's self-selected. This is not everybody, but I think it is representative, especially for people over 40. Still at this point, the under 40s have been captured by pop culture and sports and diversions. But you get these proletariat people, there is no two ways about it. But then the civilizational question is so much upon us Black, we see it. For example, Black civilization is constituted by not only the institutions that we have spoken about, Martin Luther King and Muhammad Ali. They are concrete expressions of our values, of our aspirations. And I must tell you, I was just rereading the editorial on Muhammad Ali and Avant-Garde. It is magnificent. It is magnificent. And not to understand Muhammad Ali is not to understand the Black struggle, or at least to have, or better yet, to have an utter contempt for Black people. And Black people, they respond, just basically the way we do here, how dare you? You know what I'm saying? I listen to a cat like Richard Wolff, so-called Marxist, so-called anarcho-syndicalist, in other words, socialism is establishing socialist control of your factory. Well, that was beautiful in the 19th century, maybe, but what you do when you've been deindustrialized and the factory is standing there, but there are no workers or machines there. That is not the path to democracy. But you'll never hear them mention King or Muhammad Ali. Never. Or,
I looked at it.
I know what you did, or Kathy's work on Barbara Bullock. I'm trying to look at my notes. her master's thesis. And the thing that makes it so valuable is that in the study, really of two people, but one main person and then a connecting, Barbara Bullock and Arthur Hall. You see the struggle for democracy working out through the struggle for art and culture. And I'll probably tell you some other things just to tell you what it looked like and what it felt like being around them. And then Freedom Theater. This was all a part of enlarging the struggle for democracy while at the same time, the civil rights movement is going forward. So it's such a beautiful thing to imagine or to think about. This offensive, when I say, this push on civilization and culture at the same time that we're fighting for our civil rights. At the same time, young people are being mobilized to march for jobs. When churches are leading boycotts against corporations that do not hire Black people in the city. And then you have John Allen and his cadre going up and taking over Heritage House and turning it into Freedom Theater. Imagine that. Freedom Theater, where they put on experimental plays and they taught acting to children and dancing, the arts. There's Romare Bearden, Elizabeth Catlett, Jacob Lawrence, Ellington Mingus, Train, Sun Ra, go on and on. One unbroken package. That's why it must always be returned to if we are to go forward. And everyone, all of these participants, all of these activists were fighters for a new democracy. Locally, that fight took the form of overturning the corrupt and racist democratic machine that ran the city. You know, all of this is happening at the same time. So you go to a meeting to mobilize for maybe a candidate running for office or a Black mayor or whoever. And then you would have from Ile Ife, the drummers, and maybe if he had time, people from the Sun Ra Orchestra, or even John Coltrane. You know what I'm saying? So while white people en masse were abandoning the city, had hardly ever been a part of the struggle for civil rights, were going into their own suburban caves. That's why, you know, you meet white people or any people from the suburbs, they tend to be less smart than people from cities. They know what the rules are. They know how to cheat on they really are very skillful in cheating, even on a standardized test. They've learned those skills, and it's all about the individual. Whereas here, the Black people are talking about new bonds of solidarity in the struggle for freedom, for beauty, for art, for music. You know what I'm saying? And you know, I could see it. I mean, at the same time that all this is, then you get Philly International, Kenny Gamble in there. And all of this music for the popular audience, but nothing demeans the people, you know? And of course, in the broader sense, you get the Curtis Mayfields, the Donny Hathaways, the Aretha Franklin. The nation's consciousness is still affected by them. There is no music that is not Black music in this country. It is all an imitation of Black music as such. I mean, there was this period of the British invasion, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, I think the Doors and all of that. But that was, you don't even hear about them people no more, you know? It is, we've moved beyond that. And I'll just end on this. And what we will do, and this must be a research project, I think in the study of democracy and how it must move forward, we must visit these neighborhoods. The poorest neighborhoods, the neighborhoods that are the poorest are also the neighborhoods that sit right beside abandoned factories. Well, how else could it be? The people are poor because the factories closed down. But we must visit, as we've done, but more, the churches, the mosques. You know, I don't propose necessarily that we do survey research or the type of where we ask questions. Maybe we will. But to find out where Black people are, and that is the key thing for any kind of revolutionary science, to know the capacity of Black people. If Black people have a high capacity for resistance, it can move everything. This MAGA movement will disintegrate because, I mean, please, I hope no one takes me wrong. I'm not putting white people down. I'm only assessing that. Their capacity is very low. A large part of it has to do with the capitulation of the trade union movement to racism. As I've said before, up to this day, and certainly going back to the time of King and such, the white leaders of the trade unions believed that they were fighting for the class and class issues, and racism wasn't one of them. In other words, you would hear things like this: oh, he's good on the class question, but he's a racist. Well, you can't have both of them together. You can't, because the Black worker is such a important part of the whole working class. And I mentioned this to you all, like in Pittsburgh and in Eastern Ohio, where you had all these steel mills, and even in Indiana and Gary, Indiana, the union and the mills had a racial hierarchy where Black workers would be at the lowest, hardest, most dangerous jobs in the plant and would remain there all of their lives. There was never any opportunity to move up. The union supported it. So the company, which King talked about, the company and the union leadership were in agreement. Now, in Chicago, at Southworks Steel, the big steel plant on the south side of Chicago, which has been closed down for decades, it was the fact that it's in Chicago. You had this very high level of consciousness among the Black proletariat, and they challenged it, they marched, and I don't know the whole detail, but they broke it down before the court, the legal suits. But in Pittsburgh and Eastern Ohio, there had to be a legal fight against the corporations and the union. During the civil rights movement, the AFL-CIO was led by a cat named Meany, George Meany. And they lifted not a finger, didn't say one thing in support of the Southern struggle for the right to vote. Not one word. The major big union that did was the United Automobile Workers Union, but it was all talk for the most part. They participated in the March on Washington in '63, but as the movement went head to head with white supremacists, they kind of kept it at the level of talk. The AFL-CIO said, well, we have members of our union that are in the Ku Klux Klan, so what you want us to do? I think, I'm not making this up. So in this respect, the fact that the labor movement is in the state that it's in a lot of ways, is due to the labor leadership. The fact that deindustrialization went down so easily without a fight, labor leaders. The fact that the North American Free Trade Agreement was passed by the Clintons, and so a lot had to do with the labor movement and blackness leadership class. No fight, no real fight that they put up. But then it is black people. And one of the big questions, forgive me for just going a little too long, is if, as Marxist Leninist theory holds, that trade unions are the basic organization of the working class, and therefore the left and radicals should always fight to unionize workers. I agree with that. It is the most basic organization. But what happens when the unions discriminate against blacks? Then blacks have to find another way. But then what does it mean if the basic organization of the working class is behind black folk as a whole? You know? So you have a contradiction that has to be resolved, which was never resolved and is in part responsible for the decline of the labor movement. Now, only about 6% of workers in non-governmental jobs are in unions. And they're like in Emily's union, service, hospital, city workers and such. They're under severe attack all the time. They work, but they're always poor. If their unions cannot play this role, then how will the class, the proletariat, assert itself in the struggle for democracy? One of the things that we see is in churches, the churches as their primary organization, you know, which means that an ideological struggle is going to have to take place within these churches, a real struggle over leadership. And of course, maybe the most advanced instance of a religious institution being a revolutionary and freedom-fighting organization is the Nation of Islam. And I was just overwhelmed to find out from Emily that thousands of Latinos are joining the Nation of Islam. And if the Latinos are, the Asians ain't that far behind out there in California. And proclaiming themselves, we are not Latino, we are Black, Asiatic Black men and women. I could have never imagined that for Mexican Americans. Maybe Puerto Ricans, because I do know some Puerto Ricans who were in the Nation of Islam. But this is huge, and it represents a real unity, organic unity. So I'll stop there. Turn it over to my colleague, Emily.
Well, it's always a hard act to follow you because
No, it's not.
it is, because now I'm trying to absorb everything you also laid out because, well, okay, where to start? Well, I guess two things from what you said, and I'll return to a big chunk of what you started with. The thing I wanted to return to was you laying out for us where the different theories of democracy,
Yes.
in particular, let's just even say revolutionary democracy, and us discussing what is not just the liberal definition of democracy, but then even proposals for a revolutionary theory of democracy and a democratic seizure of the state. Like, it's something I actually wanted to return to, because the main point of what how I wanted to add on to your presentation was talking about King. And this is actually something I feel a little intimidated by, because I do think we're at a point in time where even many thinkers, such as David Brooks, talking about democracy in itself, I actually would trace it back to the reason why democracy is even a question that has to be struggled over is an achievement of the civil rights movement, I would say. And I want to kind of talk about that. But I just want to start out by saying something I took away from your presentation, Doc, is that the contribution, when you were talking about how in a lot of ways, Marxism and Leninism as a body of thought struggles to help explain to us in a time of crisis, not just the American situation, but answering the question of how would the American people revolutionarily and democratically seize control of the state. Where it struggles is because something I think Du Bois, you raised this last week, but something that Du Bois is so fundamental to is explaining that race or white supremacy is incompatible with democracy. And that comes from Du Bois. And I find that to be like a very important concept, that you cannot have democracy with white supremacy, that you must have a concept of race, the color line. But sorry, I'm just nervous because I just hope I do a good job at this. Because I find King actually kind of complex in the way he describes his radical theory of democracy. But I think us bringing in King right now, and hopefully we can talk about it, like we can discuss it, is I think we're attempting to, us in the footsteps of King, and because of King and Du Bois, we are advancing the revolutionary theory of democracy in a way that, like you said, Doc, existing revolutionary thought, especially from even the Russian Revolution, which was such a great event, struggles to help explain like our situation in America and the path forward. I wanted to start with actually King, because I hope I get this right, but I think something King addresses a lot is when you read King, he in some ways is, first of all, unlike white nihilism today. King is saying that the task, he never in his imaginary says that we should be destroying the Constitution, destroying the country. He's actually saying we must give real meaning, and in some ways civilizational meaning, to the word of the Constitution, the ideals. I wanted to propose that that's what King was saying. I think by the end of this, I get this from Michelle, actually, we talked this morning, something when you read King, his later, the reason why I think his struggle in the North, the civil rights movement, as it's going to the North, is so important. King himself terms it as the second, more difficult phase, the higher stage of the freedom struggle. And the reason why is because I think King, a lot of his writings are dealing with how can we describe a crisis of democracy that must have a democratic solution. And the difference is that King describes it, and where do we go from here? He says, in the South, because of the defeat of Reconstruction, in the South, the first stage of the struggle would have to be the single objective is destroying Jim Crow laws, Jim Crow segregation, just a complete like debasement of human beings. That had to first be resolved. And then the next stage of crisis would have to be, now, what about the deeper civilizational crisis where people do not even have the same understanding of democracy? And I believe King, as well as Baldwin, even argue that without the civil rights movement, white people would be okay with there not being a democracy. Like King even says, he was like, I'm not convinced. He says, and where do we go from here? He says, what the South showed is that white people, especially in this racist South, white people had shown that they were okay with that no democracy was worth having over democracy with equality for Black folk. like real democracy, because King's making the point that there can be no real democracy if there is no equality, because you have the contradiction of how can you have democracy when every single person in that democracy does not have equal opportunity, does not have equal property, does not have the words of the Constitution are contradictory. And so King makes the point that he's like, in some ways I think he's arguing that there's a battle that has to even be fought over. Do we even, basically a battle for democracy and for a new civilizational basis of a meaning of democracy. So that's like the later years of the civil rights movement, I think, which we've inherited. I think us in Free School talking about advancing this revolutionary theory of democracy and the possibilities, basically what are the possibilities of a revolutionary democratic seizure of power by the people, is also something King was trying to work out. He actually even says at the end of Where Do We Go From Here, he says, we cannot be mistaken, we cannot substitute proposals of programs for the real task, which is power. He says he actually says that. He says the deeper truth is that the call to prepare programs distracts us excessively from our basic and primary tasks. We are, in fact, being counseled to put the cart before the horse. We have to put the horse, which is power, before the cart, programs. Yeah, he says, our nettlesome task is to discover how to organize our strength into compelling power so that the government cannot elude our demands. We must develop from strength a situation in which the government finds it wise and prudent to collaborate with us. And I mean, that's a specific language, but I actually think the subtext of what he's saying is that the people that people's movement and then the clarity of demands becomes so powerful that essentially the government must, either walk away or submit to the people. Okay, so that was just what I want to start with. But the real thing I want to talk about is actually, this was brought up last week, King's letter from a Birmingham jail. I might need your help, Doc, but what I wanted to actually talk about is that what you said, that in America, maybe I'll need Jeremiah's help too, but in America, there's an overwhelming, a lot of the basis of America is on the individual. And this is, I get this from some of what you said, Doc, but basically that in America, this whole idea of the right to property, right, which then is given a new codified civilizational meaning of white supremacy was Plessy v. Ferguson. Right. That actually the concept of a right to property is in of itself a values-based statement in a values-based society where the value worshipped and beneath all the man-made laws is the freedom of the individual and his property from those who may take it away from you. Where the people who have property are an opportunity are white people because of Plessy v. Ferguson. And in fact, it's even a history where Black folk were considered property. Rather than what I want to argue is, I want to argue that actually King's concept of a single garment of destiny and a radical revolution of values, underlying values, is King saying that, in fact, we should be changing the civilizational basis of what we mean by freedom or rights. Where the whole concept of single garment of destiny is the belief that, I'm going to get this wrong, but the general will. It's his way of saying that freedom for human beings to live, freedom for all human beings to be okay, for freedom for human beings to have opportunity is more important. That single garment of destiny is more important than democracy being quote unquote meaning by an individual right to property, and all laws kind of supporting laws of the society being both shaped by and helping support that belief that the individual is more supreme or important than all else. In his letter from a Birmingham jail, first of all, he talks a lot about, this is where he says, this is where he even makes the point, which is we're caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied in a single garment of destiny. He's replying to people saying, well, you're from Atlanta, why are you coming to Birmingham? You're an outsider. Yes. And the argument is kind of what you said in your intro, where you said, The question is, if you are to recognize something as a social problem, when does the solving a social problem as a social thing,
Right.
a collective thing, become so important that the individual no longer is supreme? I mean, that's the concept of a single garment of destiny, where the social problem becomes an imperative rather than the individual being protected being an imperative. Because, and that requires actually not just a structural change in society, but a civilizational change that could then give new meaning and new foundation to even the Constitution, or the democratic ideals that do.
And a new social contract.
And a new social
That
contract.
includes Black folk.
That includes Black folk. So actually the part I wanted to read from a letter from Birmingham jail is kind of related to this, where he even says, the small thing is, I'll start with this. He says, when people tell Black folk to wait, that, over time, eventually Black people will be given rights. He says, well, why do we have to wait for more than 340 years for our God-given and constitutional rights? Right? He's saying it's up to us to actually give meaning to the Constitution, and it's a God-given right from the get-go. But he says, okay, now what is the difference between, how does one determine when a law is just or unjust? A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law. To put it in the terms of St. Thomas Aquinas, an unjust law is a human law that is not rooted in eternal and natural law. Any law that uplifts human personality is just. Any law that degrades human personality is unjust. All segregation statutes are unjust because segregation distorts the soul and damages the personality. It gives the segregator a false sense of superiority and the segregated a false sense of inferiority. So he's saying segregation distorts the soul of both white and Black. To use the words of Martin Buber, the great Jewish philosopher, segregation substitutes an I-it relationship for the I-thou relationship and ends up relegating persons to the status of things. So segregation is not only politically, economically, and sociologically unsound, but it is morally wrong and sinful. Paul Tillich has said that sin is separation. Isn't segregation an existential expression of man's tragic separation, an expression of his awful estrangement, his terrible sinfulness? So I can urge men to obey the 1954 decision of the Supreme Court because it is morally right. And I can urge them to disobey segregation ordinances because they are morally wrong. Okay, this is the last piece. Let us turn to a more concrete example of just and unjust laws. An unjust law is a code that a majority inflicts on a minority that is not binding on itself. This is difference made legal. On the other hand, a just law is a code that a majority compels a minority to follow, and that it is willing to follow itself. This is sameness made legal. So I wanted to read that part because I think he's actually working out, in some ways, political theory with a new, coming from almost a civilizational moral standpoint, where it's almost like, and actually Diane Nash says it in a different way in her interview. She says, what people must realize, which we discovered in the civil rights movement, is that there is such thing as a higher law than man-made law. It is a moral law. And I kind of felt like they were basically saying that the summer struggle was about, that's okay, Jim Crow law. Yeah, I basically felt like that's where King is working out his radical democratic theory about how do you one, that there is such thing as a moral, or like a moral civilizational criteria where even if the way King says it is God, like there's a God-given right, like that human beings have a God-given, already have a God-given right to live, for opportunity, all of that. But in some ways, I feel like he's also proposing, when he talks about law and unjust law, what it should be the criteria. He's proposing a new civilizational and moral foundation of, in America, what are essentially certain laws or certain social contract worked out in the
Can I say
Constitution.
something?
Yeah.
See, the letter from a Birmingham jail is written to 7 pastors, who, and I think 6 were Christian and 1 was Jewish. And when the Birmingham movement in the spring of 1963 kicked off, Birmingham was one of the most segregated cities in the South. Now, mind you, Birmingham was the most industrialized city of the South also. I don't know how many Black people got jobs in the steel mills and what status they had on those jobs. Nonetheless, this is the most industrialized city of the South, but it's also one of the most segregated, one of the most repressive. So when they came to Birmingham, and led by Bevel, they began, well, the older people were a little bit constrained. They had to go to work. They couldn't jeopardize their jobs and everything. They decided to begin what they called a children's campaign, where they put kids out into the street. And these 7 pastors said, wrote a letter to King and said that he is an outsider, he's disrupting, that Birmingham knows how to solve its own problems of race, and so on and so. So he's addressing them. He's saying, he's speaking to them as a fellow pastor. And he says, the moral law, that's why he cites Thomas Aquinas, who believed that there was law above law. And that's where the question of a just struggle versus an unjust struggle. Why don't you abide by the law? So King said, well, there are just laws and there are unjust laws. And that's from Thomas Aquinas, which would even be Thomas Aquinas would talk about just and unjust wars. So he says that there's a higher law than civil law, than the laws of society. But if the laws of society are in sync or parallel, these higher laws, that is the empire of eternity, then we would follow them, we would abide by them. But unjust laws, we have a moral obligation to oppose. And that's what he's getting at with these 7 religious leaders. And so it is a letter to them, but then it's a letter to the society as a whole, explaining the civil rights movement.
Well, okay, so I kind of wanted to leap and say that in some ways, I think King's point, where he even says, he says in Where Do We Go From Here, that there must be a new language and a new vision of equality and democracy between whites and blacks, in order to actually, I guess in our terms, achieve America. And in some ways, I think that King is making the argument that more imperative than class unity, there must be moral and civilizational unity.
I would agree with that.
And I kind of want to say what I just said in the beginning of, I feel like the more you read King, the more you realize that it was without the civil rights movement, I do not think democracy as a question would be on the table to this day. That in some ways the civil rights movement is what even brought to the forefront that there's a flimsiness in American democracy without the people giving it meaning. And that it was Black folk who both pointed out the contradiction of democracy and proposed that there could be a new democracy.
Can I just say one flimsiness? I would say a fundamental flaw.
Fundamental flaw.
in American democracy. And King, in the letter from the Birmingham jail and the civil rights movement, were trying to repair that fundamental flaw.
And that's also where I think Du Bois becomes in, where he says, well, so I got this from, I think King, I only started realizing more and more that King really looked to Du Bois, because when King was in his celebration of Du Bois, that's where King just deliberately says, the value of Du Bois's Black Reconstruction in America is that Du Bois proved that the only period of democracy in the American South, or perhaps even in America, was during that period of Black Reconstruction. And this is where Du Bois says that there could only be democracy if the color line is resolved. Like, how can there be democracy in this country if not for a resolution of the color line? And I kind of think that's also this whole thing of that there cannot be just a default to quote unquote class unity without dealing with actually what is a civilizational problem and a moral problem. Yeah, I guess I'll stop there. Because in response to the David Brooks article, Doc, about white nihilism, King also has this thing where he says, Black people have done our part in trying to advance civilization. And the question now is, if the American society is like a two-faced coin, and on the Black side has done its best to advance democracy and advance civilization, then the white side has to also face the same question of, you too have suffered from segregation and white supremacy, but are you willing to recognize your own moral deficiencies and a need for responsibility, the way that Black folk have actually assumed responsibility? And I think in some ways that's the question of today, the question of like, what is the capacity? Is there a capacity of, could it be that the cost of empire could be a basis for large sections of the American people to actually see this as a civilizational and moral crisis and take responsibility? But yeah.
Yeah, can I just add to that? Because I think, I guess you could frame it almost with like a thought experiment of like, if the government were to collapse tomorrow, what would people do? And in a lot of ways, what's so uncertain and scary about this moment is that we can't really say with confidence that the people would come together and in a moral way, like really chart out a new nation or a new democracy, just without any other prior things pushing them in that direction. And so I think why you brought up also where do we go from here is because I think one of the pivotal concepts that King leaves is the revolution of values, which I think is Du Boisian, but also like it kind of, to me, it fulfills what I think all these like various theorists of democracy are trying to, I guess, reach throughout the centuries, like whether it's like Rousseau or like Lenin and Marx and all that. Because I think the consequence, like Emily was saying, the consequence of the color line is not just that it literally disenfranchises Black people, like that's an important part of it, but that it also creates a social system, which is also a system of moral values in which white people, and not just white people, but other people are conditioned to not think of themselves or to not live in democratic terms or to not even have to aspire towards democratic values. And I agree with Emily that to the extent that the sensibilities of Americans writ large have been democratized, it is because of the civil rights movement. It is because you have those images in the back of your mind of like, there was a time when Black people took it upon themselves to try to change history. and to try to change the direction of the country. And even if people try to run away from that, I think there's still that lingering memory or reminder in a lot of ways. And so I guess I wanted to just quickly bring in the like the general will thing with Rousseau. I don't really know about it from the English theorists because I've only really been reading Rousseau recently, but like Rousseau has this interesting quote in The Social Contract where he says, he who dares to undertake to establish a people's institutions by which you could read like their government, their state, must feel that he is capable of changing, so to speak, human nature, of transforming each individual who by himself is only a complete and solitary whole into a part of a greater whole from which that individual will then receive, as it were, his life, his being. So like, I think part of what I feel like Rousseau was trying to work out was like, in order for the establishment of like an actual social contract of a new state, a new civil society, he's like, it's not just that people kind of magically go from one stage to another, but that there has to be a process in which you transform people so that they are willing to enter into a new social contract in which like the basic prerequisite is that I don't just act in my own self-interest, but I act for the interest of the whole. Like I act for the interest of society, I act for the interest of the people. And he's like, it is only at that point that like a people becomes a people and not just like a gathering of, I don't know, random clans or tribes or whatever. I think the weakness of Rousseau is that he is like very constrained by the European kind of landscape and historical context and the imaginary. He's like, my ideal society is like a bunch of small states, basically what you would picture like across Europe, for example, in which like for him, that's a lot more manageable to think of. And he also I guess actually he does kind of talk about race and civilization with like his discourse on inequality. But I just want to bring that up because I feel like the valuable thing that I get from Rousseau and like the whole general will thing is that it's like, he's like, yeah, the general will is not just when you add up all of the wills and interests and opinions of like everyone who exists in society, but it is when like all of society, all the people who make up a society are actually consciously acting in the interest of the whole. And I think that's where also Du Bois picks up that concept of the general will. And like for him, like you said, for Du Bois, the greatest contradiction to the achievement of a general will in the consciousness of the American people is the color line, and it is race. And it is that basically white people, it's not just that they're not even like going against the interests of Black people, but oftentimes they are, you could also say like even like going against like, quote unquote their own interests, like by accepting the color line, by accepting white supremacy, and that this is what has essentially withered and choked away the democratic instinct and capacity of white people. And so I don't know, I just wanted to bring that up because I feel like to me, like the thing that at least from this conversation stood out, or like what I like flashes to me from where do we go from here is like King saying there has to be a revolution of values, is him saying that the American people have to be transformed if they're even to be capable of governing themselves in a newly democratic way. And that it's not just, because I think like when we talk about, I think part of what's complicated when you talk about the seizure of state power is then I think it can lead to a discussion of just like, oh, how will it happen? You know, like what will be the mechanics of like, oh, will the government abdicate? Like what will happen? But I think what King was concerned about was whatever. Oh.
Hi, Grady.
Hi, Grady. It's like whatever actually unfolds in terms of the transfer of power, the achievement of a new state, the prerequisite for that for King is the people have to be transformed to be ready to govern themselves in a new way. And I think that is the point where we're at, which is also why I agree that examples like, or sites, I guess, like Lucian Blackwell Library, the reading group we have there are almost like case studies or experiments to see, like what is the consciousness of people? How willing are they to enter into what it in effect is a new kind of social contract. Because I think what, like, from my personal observations, like, one of the things that is the most important for even, like, let's say, like, the free school or a group like Lucian Blackwell, which is a public space, is that even if there are disagreements, people have to be willing to engage with each other in good faith, not bad faith. And that is something which is hard won. It has to be built. And I think it is a testament to the capacity of especially the Black proletariat in Philadelphia, that people are so ready and willing to enter into like any kind of, like, actually, like, literally what King calls beloved community on the terms of good faith and not bad faith, which is the default in American society. And so, yeah, I think that, like, for me, a lot of what stands out with, like, King in the latter years is, like, in some ways, like, it's both, I guess, the transfer of power, but also, like, how can you create, almost in like a Kingian way, like first of all, a new democratic consciousness among the people, but then whether that manifests in like wholly new institutions or means something else, I think is more up in the air in terms of how things will actually unfold. But yeah.
So I'm probing like y'all are, but I'm probing like with Alexis Tocqueville, and I'm not mentioning like this is like some new character, but usually I'm following like a probe. So Alexis Tocqueville having the 2-volume of Democracy in America, you know, he's probing through America, the wilderness. I like King's wilderness. He's probing through the wilderness, and he's like the probe, like, from not just being in France and all the ruckus is going on, but his real destination is that he's coming to examine the prison system in the United States. Like, what was so strange about this prison system here? So that was the first thing that he thinks he's probing. But now he's like traveling through the territories and counties and anything that make up, like what you just said, make up. We now all these states here, but it's neighborhoods and different ideas of different people, not just the Native Americans. You know, I can't classify what I'm thinking about to say all that. I'm just saying Alexis Tocqueville is probing democracy in America, where you actually, the person said, he was kind of clairvoyant because he's leaping ahead with the American feeling that these people get ready to do something different than the Europeans, you know, on the continent, because they got different people trying to like figure out, you know, what we're going to do together at the center table. You know, and anything, because they don't even want to go to the table. But anyway, I'm going to leap a little ahead towards the end of the second volume. He started probing ahead, like what's going to become of the African American people, or address, I'm just going to say Black people, you know, in the 20th century, not even the 19th. He's leaping all the way up there. But all the time that I'm probing, he's still that probe for what it is, this destination of America, but that's the American. That's not taking all the fabrics and fibers, you know, to make us, you know, single destiny or single, because you got people from all kinds of diversities. And so I'm going to say what the probe took me from there is that, so I'm going to shift to Otto von Bismarck, because all the principalities in Germany, these people were, they was not welded together yet. And I'm going to use the word of the emancipation. That emancipation was for the people in Prussia, all these different people, what Otto von Bismarck to the world, to a different world stage. But I don't think that he didn't look back at this curious problem in this time, that when his documents was being sent around with Bismarck, they was doing Germany. They hadn't really got to Germany, but when you go back to look at these things, his main word was the consolidation of what he got, the different people that would become modern state Prussia. And the Prussian people wasn't happy, so they had got their emancipation, but at least they were given tools. The tools probably was their mental and their capabilities as a people. I'm not saying they don't have it, I visit Germany, like that. And then so I'm just gonna say one more thing. Just sitting here today was like, I said, so I'm looking at the students talk, but to me, the legislator, the person that's the chief legislator, that was some office that was in the Bible, because people was praying the Lord. They don't want to legislate something on true moral foundations of this democracy. And they're not willing to be the legislator like King is like, you're not saying some abstract legislator. He's really talking to them like in the center of the capital. And knowing that black families are represented, they don't have to really say that black capitalists just running all over the world capitalized. But we do have the family in the Bible. We got certain things out the Bible, like Jeremiah. You probably listen to your name that there some background because everybody got a feel about why we're naming this or why we brought food naming things. I'm bringing this on. I'm thinking about King. I'm thinking about Baldwin. I'm thinking about Alexis Tocqueville because we're talking about the heart and courage as in all Americans. Are they willing to have the courage to face not the battle from killing our people, or are y'all willing to lay y'all lives down like Gettysburg? Or we laid our families laid their life down for these lands and for the consciousness, and like God, he represents for me like the consciousness that's attended consciousness, but don't get him wrong when he's saying what he's saying. People don't like that little joke that you joke with because they don't want to be who they are. We prophesize in the Bible. Y'all might not like black. I can make this up. This is something that's part of a concrete essence inside of human beings to realize you can't enslave other people. And this other thing, I'm say one more thing. This other thing that I looked into, I said, this word emancipation, this word that now arrived out of European contradictions or European, we're going to use this word for a case word. It arrived because of the, I'm going to use the word, great Buddhist word, world word for liberation of people. Because that's the only way that they can scrape that word up so that people can have a real, true emancipation. Because Bismarck had used emancipation too for his people, in Germany. So I'm not taking that word lightly, the emancipator and emancipation, and how that word is it's like a germinating word when it comes to human beings because it's germinating inside of you with this emancipation is going to have real heavy cause to pay, but it's not that kind of, it's the cause for like future action that my actions come from the future of my action from the past that I've been learning from. I'm like that. And I'm willing to figure out we're in this church right here. This is rare to be in here. When everybody is a witness to what a legislator is. Somebody that's the legislator, the right legislation. We be waiting because it was a bill. But we counting on them that they're gonna pick up the Bible like y'all must have did when they heard y'all speaking and you said y'all don't know about the Bible than people just talking about. What you trying to use the Bible to help codify what the legislation should be true to. It should be true to the course of the destination of the country. We ain't coming here playing our families didn't play on stupidity to feed children and build schools and give everybody the right to go to free school and not make their own school, some particular new school that ain't doing nothing and ain't saying nothing to us as people. And I'm not making this up. Tocqueville, his books out, reading all this, it's a lot of reading through like Tocqueville. It's like, wow, but just to be able to bring something like democracy in America, they might not even want to read it because it's going to lay something on them to have to magnify it back to the people. Y'all ain't giving them, not giving the people. The people is the right of having anything. That's what the thing about having emancipation because how that world word is spinning through time so that it can reach a certain people because the people need to be emancipated. You don't need to think that he just sat up there and wrote this word like he just made that up. He's looking through literature, he's rewriting stuff, and his temperament got to get Douglas temperament to walk past room, you're gonna throw me out this room. And then you gotta call me now on the phone, but you gotta do something to get me to come back. Cause when you come back, coming back, like, you ain't treat me like that. This is Douglas like a lion in the Bible. He's not the Bible like the lion, but he's like talking like for the rights of the people, our people, and not to be, throw to the left or throw to the right for other people to take advantage of our work ethic and strangling our people not to have industrialists. And you use our industry to help build this whole country, everything that every rock, whatever you're talking about, engineering, everything. I don't want to go there, but everything you sit in the church, this was designed by Black people that do this kind of architecture. It's not somebody that just came out and designed this project. This is all who made it. Everything's been made, and it's the cornerstone. That's what I'm saying. And the reality I'm speaking about, it's not like just just like it's water on the bridge.
No,
I
I hear you, because it's asking that question, like, why are people not free yet? Why? What is the thing blocking it? And I just wanted to ask again, if you could re-explain that the quote from King about the like the equation that he kind of like set up, like, you know what I'm talking about? No, not really. I'm not remembering.
Equal law.
The sameness.
Actually, that was a question I was going to ask Doc about.
Oh.
Because I actually felt like King is pulling from something that I don't know when he says different, segregation is different when a majority makes a law that excludes that does to the minority that does not do unto the majority, that is difference made legal,
right?
And then when a majority does unto the minority that they would also do unto themselves, that is sameness.
The only reason why I kind of wanted to bring that up, though, is because it's trippy. You know, I'm trying to think. Well, thank you again, though, for looking so much as you have been at King, and like really uncovering this for us to discuss. And because I'm getting thrown back onto Baldwin and my question is, like, what in the year of Baldwin set the stage for our new investigation or a deeper investigation, better understanding even of kind of what you're pointing to about King, and also to what you're saying, Doc, about this problem of a complete crisis of the system and the civilization, which is at such a complete crisis, and as it mirrors a state that is so weak. How is it possible that if the state is strong, then the civilization also endures? And then the same thing
Vice versa.
right in the opposite direction, that if the state is weak, it also shows the weakness of the civilization.
Yes.
And like you both seem to also be setting up that question about the moral, how the moral has to equate the actual or the behavior of democracy. Like, you can't have democracy if there is racism, or you can't have democracy if there's color line, or however you want to say it. And then that example that you had made about Black Reconstruction, meaning, like, why did King also return to Black Reconstruction as an example of real democracy existing in America after enslavement? It brings up the white question, the problem of whiteness, and the article about the David Brooks article that you're bringing up about nihilism, and the whole question of the individual also. And like, it's very interesting to me. Why is it so easy to get rid of a state when there's no morals, or when a person does not have any morals to sustain their own social system.
And you know,
Yes.
I would be interested in your take on the collapse of the Chinese dynasty
And
and
that
the collapse of the czars.
right, and the nonviolent seizure of state
That's right.
power.
Yeah.
And
But was that collapse preceded by a crisis of civilization
right.
in both instances? And is it something about this situation
Similar.
that looks somewhat like,
Similar.
you know?
So,
And so the only reason why I had brought up Baldwin is to kind of address the white problem,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
which is what you guys are bringing up on the table. But sorry.
Can I just say one thing? Just a quick thing. I'm sorry, I'm down the wrong pipe. But, you know, Du Bois in The Souls of White Folk, if you just look at
Thinking
the
the same thing.
first few paragraphs,
I'm thinking the
he
same.
says that whiteness is a 19th and 20th century problem, which I read, whiteness emerges after the defeat of Reconstruction,
Yeah. Right.
which is the chronology that we had to
Right, that's
use
what we
in the
had to
Baldwin thing.
Right.
But this idea that whiteness,
Yeah.
I'm certain there was, you know, some, I mean, but I'm thinking as the political force and a civilization force emerges after the defeat of Reconstruction.
And now is exhausted, or
This is the question. But the chronology
right.
is very important for me. And I think for us, we keep going back to Reconstruction to make sense of the crisis of this time rather than to go back to slavery.
Right. Interesting. Wait,
I'm sorry.
maybe I'll just add to what said, because it made me think about Baldwin also, and it's difficult to put all my thoughts because it's just too many things that this is making me think. But maybe I'll start with what Jeremiah was bringing up about Rousseau, and then Du Bois's what they say about democracy and the general will. And I'm basically getting this because you made that post, and it made me want to go back and read that essay by Du Bois. I found interesting that, like, in talking about democracy, he says that it is necessarily coercive because it involves the subversion of individual well-being to the general will. And this coercion is justified only because the general will is a true general will. It represents the aspirations and values of the whole people. And what that made me think, why that made me think about Baldwin a lot was also, I think, among the three figures that we study who are theorists of democracy or a new democracy, a radical democracy, Baldwin, I think, most explicitly in my head, talks about the question of the American people and if they're even a people. And I feel like
That's Lawson too.
yeah. Well, the reason I bring this up is that the idea of a general will, in my head at least, like, presupposes that you have a people already who are capable of basically constructing a general will that reflects the values they see, reflecting them as a people and their civilization and their state and their culture and so on and so forth. But like, and I guess that's also where I agree completely that this is the significance of Black Reconstruction, is what Du Bois is also saying, is that there was this unique opportunity for a democratic revolution, which actually makes the American people a people under the leadership of, the dictatorship of the Black proletariat in certain places, but always that vanguard of the Black working class, pushing the country towards reaching that synthesis of values and civilizational basis that actually makes the American people a people, before which I don't know whether the question of general will even makes a lot of sense. And I think all of these commentators that we are discussing now, Brooks, one of the better, I have to say, like, at least he has some humility in accepting that he doesn't have all the answers. But somebody like a Curtis Yarvin just like put me in an irritable mood in the morning because I was trying to like catch up to what his problems and then also what his solutions for the present crisis is. And it's all very schizophrenic and contradictory. And not just consistent through and through, but it has this
But very,
very angry and hysterical. And I think this schizophrenic response to this political crisis, I think it also has something to do, and I don't know how to fully articulate it, but it has something to do with the fact that the basic task of making the American people into a people, which I think is the way to see the civil rights movement, rather than it being a liberal integrationist movement for like laws and policies about racial equality. It was an attempt to make a people and a concrete civilizational basis that people can in future use. Also, in terms of how the country is governed, I think the lack of understanding of the history of the American revolutionary process in those terms is what makes these people so schizophrenic in their attempts to analyze what's going on. And it also explains the gaps, like the glaring gaps in their analysis, which completely, like, it sweeps over this great period of revolution in the country, where some of these questions were being debated. And like you said, in Where Do We Go From Here, King explicit, like he says this thing that you were saying, is that it was precisely that movement in the South that forces some of these questions at the forefront of the consciousness of the American, even white people at large, that democracy needs to be thought about more seriously because there are these glaring flaws, which the dramatization of the condition of Black folk in the South is like very clearly exposing to the whole world to see. And so I wanted to bring up that point of like the struggle for democracy is also the struggle for an American people, and that is how the Black freedom movement needs to be seen, and figures like King need to be seen. And then I've forgotten my next slide.
may I ask you a question apropos what you're saying? Cito, Cito.
Right.
You know, but he would not see democracy as a struggle for the American people, and probably assumes that the American nation is already a completed thing. How would you, I mean, is that a fair interpretation?
Yeah, I actually feel like it has to do with this question of whiteness that we have identified as a major roadblock in going forward, or even having a concrete struggle for, like, you know, democratic seizure of power by the people. Because I feel like all of these analyses, like even somebody like Osita, they default to the white theories or white explanations of what democracy has to look like, because it's always the structures of it where, oh, how many people can vote, whose voice is being represented in elections, and, you know, who has a say and this and that. But then the basic question of, are the American people a people, and can they be a people as long as the color line is inscribed and re-inscribed in like so many ways right now that's even hard to keep track of, where it's like left even maybe overt legal and institutional forms and has gone into the realm of consciousness and cognition and thought because of the work of, you know, the universities and media and so on and so forth. I feel like that's an essential question one has to struggle with, and with humility, you know, not with, because,
But the Anglo-Saxon theory is that democracy is structure and process, you know, encapsulated in law. Structure and process. I guess you could say structure, process, and law, but not the substance of democracy.
Yeah, and that's what Du Bois and King are talking about, and that's why they're distinguishing between just laws and unjust laws, because laws in themselves as the basis for governance mean very little if they do not reflect, again, the general will or the general aspirations, or I don't know, even the character of a people. And for that, you first have to talk about who the people are.
I have a question. Yeah. So, but how is it possible that a structure and process theory of democracy could exist without morals?
No, well, this is the big question. And this is why, in some ways, Rousseau is not Locke. The French theorists are not the Anglo-Saxon theorists. The Anglo-Saxon theorists are far more invested in structure and process, processual democracy. If I give you the right to vote, then you have the democratic potentiality to improve yourself. If I give you due process, then that's all I have to do. you know, but the substance of democracy is what King is talking about. And it really is, I mean, and as he says, at the substance of democracy is the moral question of the human being.
I think that what.
One minute,
I'm sorry,
one minute, Grady, 1 minute.
I didn't know you were.
No, I want to get to you. Don't go nowhere.
No,
But go.
No, because it is interesting that I am like, I also kind of want to go back and forth, maybe bring it up. We don't have to go back and forth. You know, between the American people and the social contract thing.
Okay, all right.
And how the American, what you're saying seems to be that in order to ensure democracy, the American people have to be a people.
Yeah.
That's right.
Which I don't know if that's different than having a social contract or not, but
Hold off on the social contract, but because that's the civilization. Well, see, it's almost like what the civilization question is tied up with the moral question, which is tied up with the revolutionary question. But see, the social contract is a question of the relationship of the people to the state. You know, that the state, and so Rousseau's idea of the state is different from Lenin's, you know, but I think it's a better concept in a lot of ways. But then King is saying that to even get there, the people must be agreed on certain values, which in the case of the United States is to see African Americans, former slaves, as human beings. And that is still the deep moral. This is what you heard.
No, just.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just to like, you know, add to that point, this is something I wanted to say is also, I think it says like, it's explained further by the unique tactics used by the Black freedom struggle also, because it was never about winning something that excludes white people in general. It was only the success of the civil rights movement and the Black freedom struggle was from the outset, like the goals of it always involved the people, the American people as a whole. And that is why it was more about transforming
and
than winning victories.
Yeah, I'm sorry, forgive me.
No, you're
I'm sorry.
I just wanted to add.
Go ahead, Sarah.
I had a quick question.
Oh, go.
But then we can.
No, but go. You go.
Well, I'm realizing that, like, I'm really appreciative of this conversation. I know we're building off of like a lot of things. I'm pulling. I'm reflecting. I'm also reading a lot of King's Where Do We Go From Here, and especially I'm really fixated on this chapter. Actually, he talks explicitly about like white backlash and whiteness, and he starts it off by saying explicitly that America does, like in a Baldwinian way, America doesn't have a Negro problem. Like all the problems that America struggles with, even if they are most expressed or sometimes made so concrete by Black folk, it's because whiteness and democracy are fundamentally at odds, and whiteness cannot, basically, like, there is something that can, like, unless that is resolved, and Black folk cannot actually achieve a certain sense of like true and genuine democracy and freedom. And it's really interesting because he actually goes into this notion that there are two heritages of America. One is that of slavery, but the other one is equally real and equally the one that we're in the business of, democracy. He even goes to like Locke and Jefferson and how, like, basically, and he affirms that even as marred as those two are in the slave trade or owning slaves, that actually the heritage of democracy is still one that we take up. It's ours to actually complete. And I feel like he has to go into all of this at the last year of his life to lay down an ideological foundation for democracy, to prepare the civil rights movement to advance to, basically, even if they don't know it yet, or like it becomes more and more clear that like it is a democratic struggle. It has always been a democratic struggle, whether it was anti-slavery, but actually even when he talks about when Emancipation in like 1863 gave only abstract freedom, freedom that like was out of what's it called, like out of touch with the reality that like you did not just free the slave, you actually only threw him into the depths of like, you know, exposure to famine and worthlessness and all of this. You didn't actually, the way you, like, he actually even references the example of like the white immigrant. You gave them such a leg up, you gave the black man nothing, but it's actually, he doesn't say this, but he probably gets into this because of the speech on Du Bois. Like, it's actually through the creative struggle of, you know, like Reconstruction or even the dictatorship of the Black proletariat, that democracy is actually made real. And actually he connects it to what, like basically how Brown versus Board of Education, the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act were still abstract freedoms, and that actually the civil rights movement, like they were so not enforced. These laws are made, equality, freedom was promised, but the state does so little to protect it, these freedoms. It has probably so much to do with whiteness and this non-committal, he actually uses the word schizophrenia very often, actually, when it comes to this like white ambivalence towards actually making a full commitment to freedom, that like actually it's the business of the civil rights movement or the Third American Revolution, and it's the one I think we're probably seeing and identifying ourselves, this idea that like there's such an abstract freedom. How is it that actual true freedom will be achieved? Is actually a big struggle. But I bring all that up because it seems that like basically at the time that like King is writing, and the way he has to so directly address like white folk, and like he starts it by saying like we really like to actually move forward, we really need to actually tell the truth about like white folk and their role, and how the backlash we see today in this new turn of the civil rights movement. It didn't just begin when we started chanting Black Power. It also didn't even begin like 10 years ago when we started marching for desegregation. It began all the way when this nation was even being formed. But actually with us talking about these commentators, this collapse of like, you know, this nihilism we see among like young white men, this increasing, you know, protection and increasing like awareness, this you cannot ignore the depths of basically the crisis of like legitimacy, but also you can't ignore the like crisis of whiteness.
Yes.
And so if like King has to like speak directly to when a time when whiteness was still so enshrined and protected, was directly the targets of what, you know, they were trying to essentially expose and like describe as like the problem in, you know, like holding back the forward march of actually advancing democracy and freedom, then if we are finding ourselves at a time when, you know what you said, like white young men are realizing that like the world is no longer serving them, so therefore they wish to destroy the world. Not that different than basically how white folk, like back, like the articulation you had brought up, Emily, that like white folk in the South didn't want any kind of form of democracy or freedom, or democracy if it meant actually having to relinquish whiteness or to actually accept true equality. Are we at a time basically that like more opportunity, because whiteness has been so exposed to be, you know, so dysfunctional and not serving of, you know, white people? Or is it still that there's a need to like center the struggle against white supremacy, because it seems that all of these, like a lot of these young, or like young men, or like Curtis, I'm gonna mix up their names. Is it Russo? No, I'm with Christopher Russo, and then Curtis Yarvin. They seem to be just kind of, I don't know, it becomes more and more grotesque, basically.
More grotesque.
The ways they're trying to like not square the circle instead, and go everywhere but the struggle against white supremacy. Like they go to monarchy, they go to like attacking DEI, they will, or even one of them, right? Like it's more like trying to put Black folk in their place, like through the symbolic attack on DEI, but it's
Back
almost
to Plessy.
back to Plessy. So it's like this question of like, so are like, I think we always talk in free school, like how do we assess the capacity of white folk? Are we at the point where they are crying out for almost like, you know, it almost sounds like they're like, democracy really isn't working. Like we're trying to figure out why, and they just cannot like stare at the problem of like, well, have you ever heard of something called white supremacy that might not like, yeah, basically be the linchpin of like why it is that like yeah, that's not working because, yeah, basically I'm wondering like how things are basically different from King's time, our time. Are some of the problems still the same? Like, you know, the schizophrenia, the non-committal, the like delusions of whiteness, and are they to be met with the same or different kind of responses than the civil rights movement? Or yeah.
Go ahead, Grady, I'm sorry.
No, no worries, I didn't even finish. I wanted to circle back to a couple of things that Derek mentioned, and then something that Bois said. And what I think bringing them together, and also what you were saying throughout about the social contract. The social contract, creating a people. And then what Derek was saying in regard to de Tocqueville's 19th century visit to America and why he came here. You said wilderness, hold on to wilderness and wilderness, unformed, raw state of nature. Then you also talked about this part and the formation or formative process of Prussia. Because Prussia, okay, Germany struggled with its fractionated, fractal identity, even up until World War II, that inner tension where they were not a people. What Derek said that was compelling is that de Tocqueville is an observer of an experiment,
Yes.
which was a test of what you call, Doc, European, English and French social theories. America was an experiment from a state of nature to a state of civilization. They had a legacy of all that you talk about. Intellection, laws, legislatures, a whole civilization was hundreds of years old. America was a shift from that to start anew. So what I hear now, and what I've heard throughout my time at preschool, is this grand opera, which I said is the maestro, the librettist, and the composer, but you're telling this sweeping story of an attempt to create a people who can create a civilization that realizes the ideals of Western culture and civilization, which was attempted in art. The last thing I want to say is that the history of America has episodes and periods where it looked like the civilization was emerging. The people were speaking, Reconstruction, then deconstruction, creation and decreation. So the tension between the new and the old, that dialectic that you always encounter when you try to create new, America is a tableau of that process. And where it has worked and where it has failed and where it's struggling. 2 terms of Obama, compare that with Reconstruction. It has happened. We've seen it flare. You could take another example of those episodes in the history of the labor movement, where Black and white laborers came together and then they went apart. Racism and Jim Crow had its way. And I'll throw an artistic example, which may not be so appreciated, but before Jim Crow set in, hillbilly country music and African-American blues musicians collaborated. They jammed together, they performed together, and then they were stopped by the Jim Crow laws, just like the laws now are stopping people from criticizing and restricting the movement of freedom, which is necessary to create the people. Because the identity of the people in America at these times when democracy was working, the portrait of our people, the people and the general will has emerged. And then there are those persons and forces that have looked at this portrait. It's like the portrait of Dorian Gray, where it's a beautiful man, and then to some people, it's this horrible monster. A dream that's come true for episodes in our history that has become a nightmare to some people, which is now Project 2025. But what you were capturing about the Tocqueville and the wilderness and the wildness, and he said, and he took back to Europe the irony, because he said, what is he going to do with this? He said, that is going to decide your fate. And I don't think you answered it. You might know more than me, Jared.
Yes, sir.
Can I ask you a question, Grady?
Yes.
This is, I think Kathy was asking this. Is there anything different about this moment than previous moments?
I would think so. And I based that on my first person experience when I was 14 in 1965, when the school district and the low country of Beaufort, South Carolina, where Hilton Head, Parris Island, was desegregated. You talk about that. That's that. And this was in the wake of all of the violence of the civil rights movement. I was 9 and was this. Da. Fast forward, here I am in the Trump era. What's different now? It's all out. It's all out on the table. All of the stuff that you're saying about whiteness, all of that is out. The reason why it's out is that Trump, as Tim Hasiko said, our most recent white president, has said, I'm not playing by the rules of the social contract. Okay, he's the king. What is different about this moment is that it's a moment of crisis, because they blatantly said, all bets are off. All's fair in love and war. Kellyanne Conway said in Trump's first term, there are alternative facts. Blue America, red America. This is a discursive war that is beyond ideology. What you've been saying so far about civilization is really, really true, because it's a more fundamental problem. Hillary Clinton, in her Wellesley College address to her alma mater, said that Trump had declared war against truth and reason. Times against truth and reason. Those are pillars of civilization. Before you can have laws and a constitution and all of this, you have to have that as a pillar of how you relate as a people. Time magazine showed Trump leaning against the Washington Monument with his hands crossed like this. So what I'm getting at is that it's all out on the table, all of the things about whiteness, and people are being forced to make a decision. What is obvious to me at this moment that is different is this truth about the difference between the North and the South. And I got this from a Quaker. Who got it from a Quaker? Who got it from a Quaker? Now, Quakers have a mixed history on these matters, so I'm not trying to exonerate them. This is what's, and here's the deal, and this is what's different, because this is now out, whereas it may not have been explicit before. This Quaker said that the North likes the black race, but not black people. The South likes black people, but not the black race. Let me amend that. You formed a friendship when I was coming of age. You were called a nigger lover if you were white, and you were called an Uncle Tom if you were black. Nevertheless, and throughout Southern history, friendships have been formed. Those friendships were forged with risk and loss. You broke away from the norm in the mainstream. There's another example. 50 years after I graduated, a couple from my class of 1969 in high school reached out to me on Facebook and said, come to see us in Charleston. I was home at the time in South Carolina. What have you been doing? Let's talk about America and what we did at Houston High School. Those friendships are forever. And then after we spent the day together, at this lovely beach home in Governor's Harbor in Bahamas, and I flew down there that summer and spent a week continuing the conversation. And what I'm saying is that is the crux of the matter. And when you talk about ideology and you talk about the politics and the philosophies and the theories, what about the people formation that we're talking about is the people that emerge when you have this divide in a civilization between who and what human beings are. And what I'm saying is that we've always had in our country periods where the dream has been realized. When that couple called me and we spent the week and they were talking like you're talking, and they're Southerners. They were renting a house because they could not find people of their class, they were obviously wealthy, who had progressive ideas like they did. And there are hundreds of people like that in the South. The University of Virginia is doing an oral history of the integration generation to capture that transformative process. So when I hear the granularity and the grandiosity of free school discussion, I always situate it in this context where there is promise and there's peril.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question? Maybe I'd like to hear Purva's response, because I think you all have.
I'm hearing her.
Yeah, I think you all have different positions. If you want to, if you feel like, if you want to.
I got a little distracted, so maybe I'll pass.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wait, why did you point out the difference of the positions?
Well, see, I think, well, let me put it, see, I think implicit in what you're saying is a false hope. That things always work themselves out and will work themselves out this time.
I don't agree with that.
Okay, oh, good.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm
Okay,
just saying that it is episodic, it is not systemic, it's not
See,
inherent.
but that's where the difference is then. Because I think what we would argue is it's systemic. And that as such, the crisis of a system, of a total system, is such that it makes imperative that the people must seize power.
I'll say this in response to what you said.
good.
Okay, people are in the system. Okay, but the system isn't the people. So because of that tension, and that takes me back to what Bois is saying about the formation of a people
Right.
and the constitution by those actors of a general will. There are systems, but there's a dialectical and dynamic tension between the system, which is a set of signifiers and meanings that are solid, interconnected, and refractory. You are absolutely right. But the whole presupposition of being alive and a human is that we can't create what is new. And we renew ourselves, which goes to my point. What the spirit of this discussion was leading you to share, which I think is interesting historically, is the concept of a wilderness, of wildness, because what is happening and what has happened is that there is a reversion to a wildness that is systematically institutionalized. And that's where the power of ideology, of language, of signifiers and meanings and philosophy, and everything that you hold together in these discussions. I read this from someone your age who I was with last night, and I was talking about free school. And And it's interesting that she said something that, and I'll tell Sophia that I shared her quotation. It's just that there's hope and hopelessness, but we cannot lose touch of the human component, and that's a problematic. The human capacity and component is a problematic. And what you're saying, Doc, and God bless you, Doc. I agree with you because everything that you're saying about the system and all of the constructs, you're right, it destroys that.
It's what?
It destroys it. And it intends to install, it intends to remake it into something that will stop it from being what it can be.
Yeah.
I guess part of what you raised is the question of like what time are we in, and it's something we've been, I guess,
Speak up a little bit.
it's something that we've been talking about, like what time are we in American history and in world history, and I guess what I'm getting from you is that your narration of it is like, let's say you have the Obama era and then a white backlash, which is represented by Trump. I think to me I think it's too simplistic of a categorization, I think, because in some ways it's almost like, I feel like the picture that you're painting is that if we could all just find good liberal people, I'm sorry if this is like maybe overstating what your point is,
But that's okay.
yeah. But I'm thinking through it. It's like if we could just find good liberal people, then like that is the way that we recover a sense of democracy, a sense of becoming a nation. And I don't know, I feel like this also has been a long conversation that we've talked about before over the past couple of years, especially with like the Trump era. But I just think that there are, not even with Trump himself, but I think with the people who make up Trump's like actual base, sociologically and ideologically, that it's not a defense of even like, let's say someone like Chris Rufo or these kind of right-wing ideologues. I think that there are qualities, however constrained and contradictory and sometimes like insane they are, there are qualities that I see among, let's say, Trump supporters that I think are completely missing amongst, let's say, people who would just be like, oh, like, who might adhere to your narrative of like, oh, we had Obama and then Trump happened. And by the same token, I think that there are qualities in, let's say, like Democratic voters that I think are missing in Trump people. Like, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that like, I think that we're in a much more complicated time, and in which what you also brought up with like the actual tensions and the contradiction of it results in things being refracted in a way which is not, I don't think can really be mapped onto the kind of standard thing of like, oh, we had progress and then we had white backlash in the way that it's framed as like Obama and Trump. Because I don't think that Obama was progress. And I know that we may disagree about that, but I don't know. I just feel like that's part of the overall debate that we're having of like, yeah, like what time is it and how do you make sense of things? Because I would say rather than even characterizing it as like white backlash, I think it's that white people, and I'm not talking about even Trump, I'm talking about like ordinary white people are having to come up against the fact that like whiteness has failed them. And the way that they're expressing it may look to you like, oh, this is just racism come back again, like, come alive in 2025. But I don't think it's really that. And like one example, which again, I don't know, like if you want to really get into like the kind of nitty gritty of this, but yeah, one example for me is like, I don't know, I've been like interested in like Margaret Taylor Greene because like, yeah, it's like all of a sudden, it's like, how do you explain this like fitness instructor from Georgia, from like a really poor part of Georgia, who like out of literally the entire political field has like basically been like, oh, Israel's committing genocide in Gaza, and I'm going to challenge Trump on that. The Democrats never did that. No Democratic official ever came outright and said, because literally like this morning she was like, I believe in the Bible, and the Bible says that every child is a child of God. And how can we say that when we send billions of dollars to Israel, and like this does not cohere with my Christian values? And you can have a disagreement about what those Christian values are, but I think that there are, my assertion is that there are more interesting things happening amongst the American people than can be easily categorized as just like, oh, it's all Trump just represents this kind of monolithic thing like that.
Let me just say one thing.
Well, let Emily comment.
Oh, I just want to add one thing, which is kind of dialogue with you, Grady, which is going off what Jeremiah said, and it's actually bringing in something Kathy raised.
Yeah.
It was clarifying when Kathy, you brought up the nihilism, the white nihilism article again, because actually this is something when you described it as David Brooks's point about white nihilism is that there's a seeming like wave of certain thinkers and young people, like especially I think white men, young white people, I don't know, who are basically have reached a point where they're like, I don't believe in anything so much that everything can be destroyed. But actually, I feel like what's more key is like the way we in Free School would say that there is a crisis of whiteness, what Kathy, you were saying, but the human response of white people to a crisis of whiteness is still up in the air. Because I think that's where someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene or like Tucker Carlson and lots of people we don't even know, the human response to that crisis of whiteness is the qualitative difference, I think, in this time. Because a possible something to assess, if we're gonna assess, let's just say like all these white people who we know or don't know, is will your response be nihilism? I think David Brooks overly thinks there's nihilism. I'm not completely convinced by the whole understanding of painting a brush of there's white nihilism among like white men. Or will the response be there's a crisis of whiteness, I don't have whiteness anymore, so let me find new gods, black gods. Like is there a possibility, like in some ways that's the qualitative question, because I mean we weren't talking about white people before, but the qualitative change in all these Mexicans is that they're not looking for white gods, they're looking for black gods now. I mean, that's the qualitative difference. So basically, I mean, the question that Free School always was basically asking is, how are we constantly qualitatively assessing the movement of people and their changing consciousness in response to what is becoming a deepening and deepening crisis? Like not just white people, but even like us, like Asians or Mexicans or children of immigrants. And then most importantly, we're also assessing the capacity and the consciousness of black folk. So yeah, that's what I wanted to add into what Jeremiah was raising with Marjorie Taylor Greene. And in some ways, I actually think that's kind of what you're doing. You're assessing, you're kind of raising the political question of assessing the consciousness of different sections of the American people. Right. Except I think the difference is you seem to be more interested in like your friend, for example, who says progressive, like although they have money, they have progressive thoughts and don't find it in their white community or something.
Yeah, I was simply, first, I'm not prophetic. I'm not prophesying this is going to happen. I simply gave those examples as episodes, as points of reference. You cannot, and I won't, because the situation is too dynamic to draw any inferences from that. Okay. I would agree with your characterization about Obama backlash. It's much more nuanced and intertwined than that. So I was just simply trying to give points of reference to my thought. I hadn't been to Free School in a while, and this is my way of reintroducing myself and reconnecting with the ongoing conversation.
I think by going to school, I'm not making this no drama right now, but going to school for my entire lifetime, not because it was black, white, probably my values and the way I grew up, and I really knew my mom and dad. It was like my instruction at home was like my first school. And that's what prevailed when I was in regular school, is that when I'm back home, I still had that lifeline of instruction at home, traveling. It's like everything that you can ask a person, but not home. I'm cussing about white folks, because the neighborhood we lived in Strawberry Mansion, and in 1952, 53, 54, 55, my mom was going to the ice cream parlor, on Ridge Avenue. I'm not encountering that because my mom and them, who they were already, who he was, they already was in their person. I just kind of gradually found more acceptance of my mom's native beliefs, my dad's native customs and beliefs, and my whole family, but they wasn't like that. We so-and-so tribe. They just my character and dealing with them as a family and going everywhere. I probably been up to Delaware like 50 times as in childhood. Because my mom's family, you know, they still knew the roots of where we came from, North and South. And we just going all up Delaware. In the baby carriage, I can remember being in a baby carriage, and we going on the ferry, we go all up in the Hudson. And my older sister's 87 right now. When I'm speaking, I'm very fine because she always watched with me. We worked at the same job for 20-something years. But she always watched me carry the customs, do all those things, and the character. My dad, not because again, I'm not on the reservation with the Cherokee people. My mom not on the reservation with the Seminole. It's just because when she said, "Let's do your African study," because guess what you come home and say. But I'm telling you, you know who you are because that lesson at home every day. It's like it's a decent respect for my aunts and my uncles. I could knock on their door, and I didn't say I just barged in. They gonna say, they giving a report back to my mom, my grandmother. I stopped at all my aunts, and I can carry all my younger siblings that's 4 years younger than me, nephews and nieces, because I'm knocking on my aunt. Well, she died like 106, and my dad oldest sister. Like I met your dad. And she's gonna go back down the pipeline and tell somebody, hurricane by her today. This is in 1959. And he bought other little ones, they little than he is. Right. And he knocked on the door. Everybody sitting in the living room. He lived off of Allegheny, Ontario, beautiful house, apartment. And we sitting down in the living room. We just sit all in chairs, everybody, nobody's running through the house. It's a characteristic that he's speaking about. And it's part of being familiar with people's families. Because I had my uncle, my cousin Ronnie, he came from Alabama. He called my dad by 50 because he lived in Alabama. I didn't know nothing about the Catawba people or the Creek Indians.
So you have Native American on both sides? Cherokee, so your people's from North Carolina?
Yeah, I'm going to bring the portrait. I wanted to bring the portrait because I was raised by the whole family. Every aunt, every uncle, with all the lids. I never was that time. And so something about like in your custom, you had this shrine. They collected everything, and I was a gift giver. So they bought everybody always sent me a gift. So my whole place at home is came from gift givers. But that's the value that goes to no matter what kind of racism and hatred, you're not gonna practice it. You're not gonna feel like I don't want to talk to you. I worked in the hospital for 20-something years. And I used to go up on the floor talk to my boss. Go talk to that lady. She's Jewish. She know you don't eat pork. Lady, I could give her a kosher plan, but it's being transferred because I'm still who I am. I still love him, but I'm not going to be transformed just because I'm not fighting you with the nasty, vicious wound. But people be wounded, they never get healed. You trying to heal me, and you still wounded. And you're not willing to accept the holiness churches I've been to as a child. I know I was born in like Cameroon, all that little boy going. Don't even know what Cameroon church is. But people can understand our hidden values, but not hidden from like I'm hiding, but the safety of our children, the way I treat my daughter and my kids. This is something that have Black people's lives in their hearts. They don't want their children destroyed and their intelligence created. They more inventive than anybody probably ever seen. I've been in a lot of science projects going, and I'm just gonna say one more thing. When I was it's in 1962, my mother was 62, whatever the World's Fair was. My mother told us, don't come back to school and have all the kids upside down because they don't know what side they're up yet. And so I've been to the World's Fair in New York. So anything that was advancing the future, my mother was like one of those futuristic students. She went to girls' high. She spoke German already. She didn't even say she's going to talk. No, I don't speak German, but I do have other customary things that custom that I respected. From India to Tibet, China, whatever country you're talking about. I had to be at home. My mom would come there and look at everything too. My dad told me he's immaculate because everything that I was acquiring was something that a gift giver from another culture. You gotta start having people believe. Don't think it can't come to people. Hit the number every day in our custom. To these people stole the whole numbers from us because you could dream one dream. The person said, put 10 cents on that. The number come out that afternoon. Somebody come like you came in here with that piece of paper. Somebody passed me up like that. So what number's on it? That number, about 300 people have the number, or 1,000 people, and everybody got to hit that number because our people count numbers like accountants, and it's part of our folk memory.
They don't know what you're talking about when you're talking about numbers.
Well, Tony drafted into this language.
That's another.
Drafted into the language.
You know, it's like
They would never
like hit the number.
They would never
Like the lottery?
Well, it's like a street lottery.
They stole our lottery, maybe state lottery. And then they took all the money and things.
That's right. But
From our
street lottery.
neighborhood treasure.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Can you imagine it? Y'all have a number, like the Chinese people love playing numbers. They got all kind of attitudes and everything that you can play numbers, all these games, but basically it's something to sum up the amount that you get and you kind of spread wealth.
Could I just explain to them this thing? See, you'd have what they call street numbers. It's based on the horses, you know, the horse races. Yeah, and you got a person who comes, you know, like he's
A bookie.
the bookie. He come and say, you know, well, Emily, you want to put yourself, you say that, well, Tony, I want to put $1 on these because you have three numbers, 345. You know, you want to put $1 on that. So if you hit the number, in other words, if the horses come in, I don't really understand it myself, but if it comes in 345, that meant you hit the number. That means for $1, you get $5. Yeah, that's what he's talking. So that used to be prolific in the Black community. And then when they came in with the state lottery, and it was illegal until they came in with the state lottery, the state doing the same thing, but now it's legal because they're doing it, and it's supposed to add to paying off the state budget and all that.
That's just gonna be funded by the lottery.
By the lottery. But anybody else want to say anything on this? But I appreciate, see, I think this, and this helped me to understand what Purba always asking me, you know, about, well, why didn't I give up? Why did I continue to? And it's pretty much the way you said it. It's the values that you brought up with.
We can't go back. Where are we going to go?
Yeah, and see this thing, although I would have to say, Derek, that your extended family was bigger than my extended family. You had a really, and I could see it in your physical, but I didn't know you had that much Native American in you.
Let me say something.
See, let me just say something to them because they might not know. See, he said Cherokee and Seminole. The Cherokee of North Carolina, that's why I asked him, your people from North Carolina?
Yeah, my daughter, she lived there. I'm happy. I'm going to go down in September and get it.
Say what he said?
My daughter.
Oh, yeah, it's back there. But see, the other thing, the Seminoles are from Florida. But see, the Seminoles, it's argued that the Seminoles accepted so many runaway slaves that it became a Black Indian nation. And you will get in New Orleans, in Mardi Gras, you have people who are Black Indians. They say they're Indians, which means that they're tracing themselves back to Native American tribes and to really the Seminoles. But this is a big thing in Philadelphia. And Grady, you probably know you from South Carolina. Yeah. No, he's a Geechee.
Geechee.
He's a Geechee from the islands.
Yeah.
But see, this thing is, a lot of Black, because we mix with Native Americans, and especially the people from North Carolina, in Philly, they always talking about, I'm an Indian.
Yeah.
They would always talk about that, but see, they mix, and they have, a lot of things, like he looked like a Native American.
Yeah.
My people,
But
my
see, in
neighbors,
South Carolina,
they know I ain't
we didn't
playing
have,
around.
we never said that. We never, people
guys
from,
don't have
we
to
never
put
talked
that.
about that. But see, black people, a lot of black people say they're Indians because it'd be better to be an Indian than a black person. Because a black, am I right, Jack?
No.
Yeah. It's deeper than deep.
My first youth movement group, right, Black Concern Youth, right, where Marxist in 1968 in West Oakland, and the principal that I went to West, he didn't know what to do with me. So he can't do that with me. And I had my shirt on. I had my shirt on for the Church of the Advocate because I need to get the recreation center so we can have our free schooling. The superintendent of the recreation came up to me. The gang that I went to, they looked at the reason why they was all outside just hanging around. He came and sat at the end of the table where we was at meeting with him because he wanted to give us, we need to have this building. So he looked at my shirt and said, the great white father won't like that shirt. So now I don't really know everything about the Church of the Advocate yet. I'm still looking at the shirt, looking like everybody looking at me because they wonder when I'm going to say to him now. Because they know me already, right? My food, right? And I said, I'm looking at my shirt, the Church of the Advocate. I'm not mad about black conservatives, right? He said, he apologized. He said, I'm sorry. I said, he wasn't. That's what I thought. I said, no, you see all those guys out there? That's the gang. I said, we in black conservative, BCY, right? And he said, I said, so what are you saying now? I said, I apologize. And y'all can have the recreation sit down for our, that was our free schooling. And my shirt, and I had black concern.
Let me tell you something, just on a Native American thing. Coming up, my first experience of dancing was Native American dance. Even up to this day, you ever see the Native Americans do the hoop dance?
No.
I can do all that. Hey, go get a hoop. Get a hoop. I'll show you.
Oh, you don't know about
No, because, and this is what I learned this in North Philadelphia,
This is like
being in the Boy Scouts, Black Boy Scouts. And there was a man, now he could have been a part Native American. His name is Mr. Campbell. And he taught us, and we made Native American costumes, all that. I wore all that, hoop dance and all. I'll show y'all sometime. But this is because there was this infusion of people from North Carolina and maybe from Georgia. I don't know about Georgia, who had Native Americans.
So for some whole time in my life, with all my aunts, there used to be about at least over 60 of us. I really grew up in Wildwood, in New Jersey.
And how Wildwood come into it?
Because Wildwood, after I got a little older, I started, everybody from Canada that used to have all these places there.
Yeah.
I don't know all this going on yet, right? But our family, I'm looking at our family walking up the boardwalk, all those that could walk. My aunt,
And black people were not welcome in Wildwood.
well, listen to the 60 or 70 of us, right? We're walking up the boardwalk together, right? You're gonna tell we can't. I've never even heard nobody say, "Okay, come here," right? I'm going in the bar, sitting in the bar stool with my dad, all the aunts, sisters, everybody. And the man that run the bar, like, how you doing? So I don't really know if nobody we eat at every restaurant.
Well,
Go to, every restaurant.
let me just tell them, just to acquaint them with this. South Jersey is one of the most racist. That was like, because like Atlantic City and Wildwood and all these places like that. At Atlantic City, black folk were allowed only to go to one restricted area of the beach. My father,
Chicken bone.
Chicken Bone Beach. I didn't want to eat because black people, when we go down to Atlantic City, we fry chicken, and we go down there and put our blankets out and party like it, party hardy. You know what I'm saying?
Ain't nobody chasing you.
And see, there was a famous. Let me just tell them this. There was a famous black club in Atlanta, Club Hall.
Wonder Gardens.
And then they had, other places, and that's where Duke Ellington and all of them would go. But we were very restricted. Now, my father, see the name Montero, and my father, they didn't know whether he was Italian, Puerto Rican, or what.
So you got the end.
So, and then my father did not talk like a black Southerner. And then he could perform in a certain way. So in Avalon, New Jersey, where they would never in a million years sell a house to a black person. Now, these were all working class Italians from South Philly who came over in the Great Migration, Great White Migration of the 1880s. Now, they just got here.
Yeah.
But yet, they're going to say that no black person can live down there. My father got a house, got a crib down there, a little house, and then he worked on it, expanded. It's a very beautiful, that's a very, very rich place. But I'll just say this, two experiences I'll tell you all about.
Okay.
And this is why I always think about what you say, John, about that little white girl. And me and my brother, we're only 12 years old, and it was like a law that white kids couldn't play with us. So we were alone. And I remember there was a place on the boardwalk where teenagers, white teenagers, would go, during the evening and so on. And they would dance and listen to music. And I went in there and I sat down, and they came and told me to get out. So, see, in a certain way, it's hard for a white person to tell me anything. I don't want to hear it from you. Because, I do in a certain sense. My heart ain't that hard. But they got a lot to answer for. For these people to come now talking about, we want to go back to Plessy v. Ferguson and all that old bullshit. Who are you talking to? You know what I'm saying? But, the other experience, and every summer they would bring people from down south to work in the kitchen of this restaurant. It was kind of an upscale. And my brother and I would work there also. We've been working since we were 7 years old. That's all we did was work. But we worked there washing the dishes. And all the black people they brought up from down south, and then they have a place just like Jim Crow, just like Sharecrow. They have a house for the Negroes. You know what I'm saying? And they would work in it. And they all came from down south. And I remember the chef was a black man. And all the waiters were white. Or they just, or we're working to pay to go to Penn State. That white shit. Just look, come on, I don't even want to commentate on it right now. But they would be all the waiters. And so they would come in with their trays. I don't know, y'all.
Yeah.
And the chef was black. And he ran that. I had never seen a black man talk to a bunch of white people. Get that. You're not telling. He was talking to them whites like that. Man, I'm saying, damn, I've never seen anything like it. But it was that kind of Jim Crow situation. And I don't think. But we were the open. No kid was my brother and I, we would just sit on the beach, beautiful ocean, and no kid was allowed to play with us, to even say hello to us. This is the way they were. And these are white people who had just came over. On the Great Migration, Italians. Italians. Like you look at the Godfather, like they so down. Hey, man. No. And Italians and Irish. And so we we had to just be alone,
Mm.
you know? And it was beautiful to be down there on the beach and all of that, but you wanted to get home too.
Mm.
And this is where when you raise the moral question,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
see, there's a certain human and individual responsibility. Like when John, I never forget that story you told, John, that you were just playing with the little girl and her father came home and saw them play and beat that girl and he stomped her. Stomped her. You know, and I ain't never seen nothing like that, but I do know there's some cruelty among these white people that I don't think it's ever been fully measured. Because see, the white establishment hides, and like I agree with you about this, great, a lot of things coming out with them talking about we want to go back to Plessy v. Ferguson, the black people, you know, they should have accepted their status. And what they're really saying is black people are inferior.
So
And I experienced it. I think all of us have, all our lives, go to school, Central High School, and they don't want you in there.
I went to Allen, 99.
Don't want you there and let you know, and going to do everything not to teach you. You know, and see,
That's for Jewish
you know, like,
kids.
oh, I'm sorry.
That was for Jewish kids. That was for Jewish kids.
Well, now this, I was just going to go there. Central High School, when I went there on a Jewish holiday, there was no classes because the school was so majority Jewish. And part of the reason that certain things I couldn't learn, like mathematics or calculus, you know, the Jews would send their children to get tutoring and all that. We didn't know anything about that. And the teachers didn't want to teach you. They wanted to ignore you. You know, kids need mentorship and encouragement, and they do the opposite. And that's very damaging at a very young age.
Especially in the
And
50s and
therefore, when I got to Lincoln University, it's like I died and went to heaven. A black university where everybody cared about you and loved you. Now, let me tell you what, so you know, y'all don't know this about me. When I went to Lincoln, I was so enthusiastic that I got perfect scores on all of my tests. I mean, I got everything right, just like Michelle. Everything I got right, man. Because I was just studying. I just wanted to study and stay in the library because I'd been abused so badly. And so I had a white political science professor. And he said, Tony, look at here. I'm going back to Albright College, and would you like to come with me? And I, blah, blah. So I'm a little bit disappointed in my classmates because you have a lot of that fraternity and, drinking and partying type of thing. And it really diminished you. But then we had a hardcore group of revolutionaries. But anyway, so I said, oh, if I go to this white college, they'll be more serious, yada, yada, yada. So I go up there. There are about 6 black students in the whole joint, 6 or 7. And my roommate was a young kid from Zimbabwe. It was then called Rhodesia. And he was scared to death, as he should be. But I hung out with a group of more bohemian students, because the rest of the students, the normal white students, they didn't want to have anything to do with me. Now, I was this young, kind of cute young boy, you know what I'm saying? I mean, there was nothing offensive about me. I was not, rough or thuggish or nothing like that. Very polite and everything. And I remember among the students that hung out these books, there was one young white girl, I think one white girl, there wasn't many, one white girl, a little cute girl with blonde hair. I was a virgin. I ain't had sex in my life. One day, I'm in my dorm room, and these white guys standing outside threatening me, telling me to stay away from that white girl. Now I'm telling you, like the way you see me now, I'm more like, fight, argue, and all of that. Back then, I was so, just really polite. I was raised in the church. I didn't want, and look, I got my ass out of there. I went back to Lincoln. I came to the dean. I said, Dean McCrae, is it all right if I come back? He said, certainly, Tony. You know what I'm saying? But I say this. This is where I agree with this. We have to take the measure of these white people. Because they ain't going to do it. It's like they have an investment in hiding who they are and presenting this propaganda image of, well, that's just them two that we just talked about. What their name? Yeah, y'all. Oh, that's just them. They nihilists. They this, but we don't know how deep it goes. But we do know, and black. This is the other thing. Baldwin brings it up. Black people are very honest. White people are not. When I say white, I know there are 3 or 4 that are. But there's something, they have lied for so long that can they ever tell the truth? This is the question I ask. They lie like it ain't nobody's business. Lie. They lie to the world. They lie to themselves. Everything is public relations. And now it's cracking, I'm sorry. Let Sean come in. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
I just had a small question about the story that you said. Why do you think that they found you so threatening? Because it wasn't, as you said, something physical and outwardly, right? So
You got it right.
That's the way it was.
So your question
That's just the way it was at that time.
oh, I asked, why did they find you so threatening?
What I'm small. Hey, Jerry, I'm skinnier than you at that time. You know what I'm saying? I was just a skinny little guy. I wasn't real sure, but nice looking. And I wasn't trying to be, just young and look nice and everything. Wait a minute. See, this gets to the civilization question. And the question is not who I was, the question is who are they?
Yes.
Because there's no way, and there's only about 6 black people up there. If there was one girl, and who did we threaten? But it's just who they are. And that's the question I think King asked the letter from a Birmingham jail. There's something. They are something. But we see it in the free school. It's hard for a white person to stay in here. They come and go, And part of it is, and you would think, see, because we have so many Asians now. So you think, well, y'all would be a buffer. They claim to like Asians, right? I mean, at least they put on the front. So they think, well, and then y'all are highly educated, that would be a kind of a buffer to make it easier on them. We can't take the black people, but the Asians could make it easier on us, so they think I'm serious. But they don't even stay then.
Right.
They come, say what they have to say, and then they leave. You know, and yeah, that's now out of Lucian Blackwell, there are several white people who have stayed and have grown. You know what I'm saying? And that's the hope for them, not for all white people. That's, I mean, that's,
Because
but I don't know, Shantu, I don't know. You see how you look now with a shaved face and everything? You look innocent and all that shit. I look more innocent than you.
You ever been picked up and walking down the street by the police? You
No.
can't even think about it, right? So I'm not gonna over dramatize it, but if I was carrying, I had to carry my book bag. But you ain't
You come about going to school.
I'm just going to school or walking where I'm going at, or driving in the car, and me and you together, and I'm gonna get arrested. They just looking at you like, how you doing? How long you been here? They don't for us. What you doing up here? What you want? You know, no common sense shit they ask me, but they either could shoot you if you do the wrong thing, or you go to the police station. Don't think this hasn't happened. And they say, man, he took so and so down 14 G's. I said, man, they see what they ain't people ain't there. And
you know,
because that's a threat to us when we out.
But you know, like you take the Mama's Day parade, right?
Come on.
Now I used to be, I guess when I was little, I did everything. Indian dancing.
You were a mother?
Well, we're the only Catholic. I was in a drum and bugle corps. Remember I told you I was in the drum line? You know, even to this day, I love looking at historically Black colleges, the marching bands. They done shut everything down. They done took that over. But we had a drum and bugle corps. Back then it was bugles. You have all kind of bugles, you know, big ones, small ones. So I was in the drum line. So the mummers, especially what they call the clown divisions.
Okay.
The clown, now that's, so they needed, because they, you know, they drunk and shit, and they, whatever they was doing, they had, you know, clown, and of course, the clown divisions always had a lot of blackface.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Now, this is in Philly. Italians and Irish, you understand? So, so they needed a drum line, and they would have like also from the Black Elks, the Elks, and so they would be playing, you know, certain what is it, golden slippers or some shit, you know, and we would be, you know, me and my colleagues, we would be the drummers. Now I'm only about 12 years old, so they got us. We marching behind these lines,
The black face.
with the black face, and we playing for them, and they drunk and shit. I mean, come on, this is Philadelphia, and then we had to shut them down, shut them white people down. Yeah, because see, let me just tell the story so y'all get the picture. This is that you can't even make a movie of too good. I mean, because so then the civil rights, Cecil Moore and them said, look, they start down in South Philly.
They can't come up with that.
And we got tired of them coming up above Girard Avenue, or above Spring Garden Street, really. Where the Black community, North Philly, started with that black face and talking about using the N-word and pointing at people and all that. They got them, they shut them down. Cecil and them, y'all ain't coming above Spring Garden Street. Keep that BS down there where you live. We shut them down and finally forced them to stop wearing a blackface because, see, all of that was financed by the city. And Black people paying taxes for y'all that, and they were all drunk all the time. And then see, they have the main parade. It's on New Year's Day coming up Broad Street, straight up Broad Street. And then they would have, at night, they would have the two-streeters up. Then they'd be marching down 2nd Street in what is today known as Northern Liberties and Fishtown. But yes, you just cannot, you just can't paint over it. And these are just my experiences. I'm certain that people had much harsher, but see, and then when we see that civil rights movement, it didn't change everything, but it forced them white people to back up.
Right.
We had to. And when Cecil and them got out there, and he brought the young, what they call themselves, Freedom George, I forget, the young militants, young, and they were young. I'm talking about, they were not that much older than me, but they had all the courage in the world. Freedom George, Freedom Smitty, Freedom this, they just call themselves Freedom whatever, you know? And they told them, back when we call them whiteys. See, black people got about 100 different names for white people.
They got one name.
Yeah,
They didn't even call them white. They were from YT. They ain't saying white. They saying
well, what
YT.
about Peckerwood?
That they use. Young people using white.
I mean, we had to come. I mean, what else we gonna do? Suppress all our anger? Man, they got out there and shut that thing down. You ain't coming up in North Philly with that no more. Sorry if I talk.
You're not even saying white.
This is not the country you thought you were coming to. No. And this is why I think it's absolutely right to raise the civilizational question. Because this is not just bad behavior of a few drunk white people. This is deeper than that. And see, the other thing, when King came to the North and to Chicago to demonstrate, he said, in the South, we faced the Confederate flag. In Chicago, we was looking at the Nazi flag. Yeah, the swastika. The question then is, who are these white people? You understand? And it turns out that a lot of them were Poles and Ukrainians and Eastern Europeans who had collaborated with Hitler. But then another big part of them were part of the Great White Migration. They just got here and had more rights than black people did. That's why that Plessy v. Ferguson decision is not to be underestimated. And once you deconstruct it, and you write whiteness, and Baldwin got that thing right.
Wait, can I?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, just to add, because I think I'm still stuck on the part of the conversation where we're talking about what is the future of the American people, and all of the, even the anecdotes and these experiences that you guys were talking about. I mean, it brings me back to what Bois also says in that essay, is that black people have become a people because of their historical experiences. There is something shared. There's a shared worldview. There's a shared worldview over both what you value, what gives life value, what gives human life value, but there's also a shared idea about what is evil and what is immoral, and this like the structures of white society being basically antithetical to civilization. So and then in the same way, white people, because of their need to protect whiteness, have not been able to become a people. And this is why Baldwin says there is no white community.
That's right.
And today we are talking about an even like bigger question, because you have the entire political system in a state of collapse, and you have all of these like people grasping to explain it in some way and failing miserably because of this basic fault line not being given attention, which is that the color line has really distorted the possibilities for a whole American people. And the question we are dealing with right now is, will this be a possibility? Is somebody like Marjorie Taylor Greene, is this consensus even forming, like, you know, in unsteady ways, maybe not completely clear what its future is, on moral questions like genocide?
Yes.
Will this actually open up a pathway for the American people to become a people? And I think that's sort of what the free school is in the business of right now, to assess, like, you know, what are we actually looking at, and what are the possibilities? And honestly, like, revisiting where do we go from here? And I think it's particularly because it was the last year, like just a year before he was assassinated. First of all, it gives you a sense of why he needed to be assassinated, because he was talking about a restructuring, not like these people are talking about the, like, the superficials of governance and policy and so on, but a fundamental restructuring of the people, and why that was dangerous. But then also reading King, it just reminds you, it makes you almost like it makes you so desperate and frustrated about the lack of principled leadership anywhere in, you know, the American political sphere. Because even when he's trying to assess like what happened in the first stage of the Southern movement, and then the new stage that still needs to be worked out, he approaches these questions with so much sincerity and humility, where he will be like, oh, these were our organizational weaknesses in the first part, you know, because these were our limited goals there, and our methods were like tailored to those goals. But now we need to, like, you know, broaden even the concept of what we are struggling for, and broaden the concept of even, like, you know, the anti-poverty programs, and even the democratic struggle and so on. And I feel like, honestly, like, I think this is something that I'm starting to get frustrated with. There isn't enough serious, sincere, sober reflection on the part of, you know, most intellectuals who are in the public sphere and speaking about these things. But
they can't control the dynamics, right? They can't control the dynamics, like, of the mass. About once our people, we have the equation of mass. We have the equation of mass. They can't control my dynamic, and it's a lot of more individuals. We don't act individualistic, but as a mass, nobody can really numerically control. Like, I'm going to control this mass here, because we make up a better vibrancy through all of our cultural dynamics. We got mountain this pianists, but they just not like they just play piano. But the dynamic of what white folks been trying to confine us to, the thing that for me and Bois, my thinking with him is that our dynamics, you know, I told you, like, for me, it's like the physicist is operating on the dynamics of our mass. This is the quantitative mass, because Bois is like, I'm not just a worker. I'm a creative person that works with a lot of creative and a lot of, but people, they're not looking at us like we purposely we have built all these kind of institutions and structure. People later on came in to see train stations set up, underground subway, tunnels. You can't go nowhere else around the planet. There's other places stimulate to this. But
let me give another example. You know, I shared with, I think, Emily and Serafina a rally that we had when I was fighting to get my job back at Temple. And I'm convinced, had I been white, there would have been a different response. You know what I'm saying? First of all, the white administration and the Board of Trustees, you know, the African American studies was like a ghetto thing. That's the ghetto. Just keep them over there. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't a serious or rigorous intellectual academic enterprise. You know, it wasn't. But you always, and I could be wrong, but you always have a sense that were I white, the Board of Trustees and the administration would have had a different approach. First of all, they would not have so easily and readily accepted Asante's firing of me. They wouldn't have. And then when I made an appeal and then had to support 300 academics from around the country, the Black community, labor leaders and shit, they weren't going to bend because they could not give an inch to Black people. And that's, I'm telling you, know, they just won't give an inch. And they only concede something when it's an existential threat to them. And that's why studying and looking at all of this is very important. Like at Lucian Blackwell, you know, when we sit down and talk, and Albert, and especially Jeremiah, when they be getting into the Bible and shit, you know, it's like, I mean, it's like we've known each other all our lives. I mean, the converse, just like you said, we are people, a common experience, a common oppressor. I mean, all of that is an assumption we begin with. So we, the Black community, are capable of all of this, but we don't know what white people are capable. Well, they're not capable of a great deal. They really aren't. And this, you know, they have sold something to the world. And now the world sees them as who they are. Black people always have. The other thing, think about this. They pass a bill that ends up locking up 1/3 of young Black men. It's so ugly that they put into these state laws 3 strikes and you out. So 3 strikes, the 3rd time you in for life now. Then they have all of this shit that ends up criminalizing crack cocaine in a way powder cocaine ain't. That's crack. White people started with powder and psychedelics. Then when the price, they got so strung out, then they had to go to crack. You know what I'm saying? Which, you know, I kind of celebrate. Now it's on you. But to criminalize crack at a higher level than powder cocaine meant that you would do longer time. And there's always this element of revenge. You take these white judges and shit in this city, we are going, oh, you're going to think you're going to commit a crime? I'm going to destroy you. And you ask, well, why did they? I don't know. It's something about them. They don't know me from Buster. I ain't never put none of y'all in slavery. And a white person to tell you, slavery was a good thing for y'all. Y'all needed to get out of Africa. Am I right? Yeah, that's the way they are. Where does it come from? And why do they never self-examine? Why aren't there Harvard professors in the Department of Sociology or the Department of Philosophy that are studying no, we're going to do transgender studies. Anything to take away from the real deal. You understand? I mean, what? I ain't exaggerating. And every Black, when we sit down and anywhere, y'all sing it in your own line. But anytime Black people sit down, the way we talk, I talk like this, and they tell their story. Yeah, man, I know what you talk. Just like that. It's a common experience. I don't care whether you in Chicago or Cleveland, anywhere. Black people sit down, the same thing. I knew it. Yeah, we did. We're all suffering the same oppression, and it has not. I don't think it's abated. I think it took a new form, and I think white people, they're dissatisfied because their system is collapsing. Their system is in crisis, but they're very happy with locking Black people up, police murders,
Infiltration.
infiltrate, anything.
Infiltrate.
They go along with, it's not resistance to Black oppression. There's nothing. Okay, those who went to into the civil rights movement, these are heroes of white people. They're heroes. But that's not by a long shot the majority. That's why, this thing of we waging the class struggle, you ain't waging shit. We're socialists, we're communists. That's why they're the worst ones, man, because it's hypocrisy. You know what I'm
No, that's true.
No, this is a civil, this is not, that's why we connect the civilization and the moral.
Yes,
And the moral and the revolutionary.
yes,
The moral imperative is the revolutionary imperative. This king, the revolutionary.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No. Actually, because that's actually it seems like a small sentence, but actually the thing that always stuck out to me in the first chapter of Where Do We Go From Here is the question King asks, where he's like, the question in front of us before the second stage of the struggle is, why is equality so assiduously avoided? Why does white America delude itself? And how does it rationalize the evil it retains? It's kind of interesting because King always brings it to the question of, like what you said, the moral is the revolutionary question. Why? King is basically asking, why is it so hard to root out evil? If evil is evil, why is it so hard to root out evil and make a new country? And I don't know, I always thought it was interesting the way King asked that question, the way he asks the political question is one that is like not just deeply ideological, but moral, revolutionary. Yeah.
Can I ask, a question related to this? Because I feel like one of our central working hypotheses in free school for several years has been that the American people are less racist than they were. And no, I'm not asking not to put you, I'm not asking to put you on the spot. I'm not asking to put you on the spot. It's because this is very important also for me, because it's literally like, what are we staking our lives on? And I guess I'm curious, we don't have to, answer it now, but I feel like this is raising that question in a serious way.
It probably is
and on what basis do you make the
it's probably what you was learning about us.
It's the question of the American Revolution process.
You in another school learning about us.
question of the American Revolution.
And you learn about negative things about us. That's a lot of negativity going on.
But I think he's asking a great question.
Right.
And white people have not collectively decided whether they want to be racist as in the past, or whether or not they want to take steps towards something new. I'm very impressed with Marjorie Taylor Greene, her courage. I'm not impressed with Steve Bannon. And you get a guy like David Brooks, he's trying to move towards something different. He's trying to do it through white religion. But the reason I laugh is I'm thinking maybe I got to retract that.
I guess my added question to Jeremiah's question is, because when King talks about Black Reconstruction, in his speech, he says that the hope or the faith, like the revolutionary hope, is that the Black proletariat as the leading edge forces the white proletariat, who maybe aren't even a proletariat, they're just white individuals, forces them into an actual productive creative relationship to show white people who hopefully abandon whiteness how to be a coworker in the kingdom of culture. Basically. And in some ways, the way we would define it is what is the capacity of human beings to become Black, like to actually make the moral choice. So I don't know. That's just kind of an added question.
My question for preschool, after having been away for a while and coming back, is let's put our imaginations in the future. And there has been a liberation of the masses, that what we've envisioned and what we've critiqued and what we prescribe from our critique about building a new country has happened. At some point, there is a realization of what we're envisioning and what we're reasoning ourselves toward. What are we going to do with the people who, on this path to liberation, what are you going to do with the people who all along have disagreed with you, have resisted you, and have done everything that they can within their awesome systemic powers to defeat and deny what you're doing? So, I mean, that's what I'm looking at. Now, that is not an immediately answerable question, and I'm not asking you to answer it. It's a rhetorical question.
Yes.
But what it is for me, though, is that it helps me appreciate this project.
This what?
This project of
Yes.
free school.
Yes.
And I'll just cut to the chase because the hours is upon us. But I'm looking at Asians. And I go back to this is the compelling thing about free school. You could be white. You could live white in America. You've chosen not to.
Yes.
And you are identifying with the tradition, which is Doc was saying, we had to fight to get our intellectual tradition acknowledged as part of knowledge in our civilization and culture. You are embracing it. So there's something powerful about what we're doing, and you are a testimony to the efficacy
Absolutely.
of what Doc is talking about. So the cutting edge for change and transformation is in this dialogue, it's in this discourse. And then my other concern is because you still have your opposition to deal with, once you get the world the way you want, you're going to legitimize a way of running this new world. What are you going to do? Okay, you see what I'm saying? And then in the process of getting to the new world, the new civilization, you're going to need allies and accomplices. And I see Asian engagement with the Black radical tradition as being a breakthrough and a testimony to the efficacy of that critique. Because look at how it has changed you and reoriented you in society. So that's
I'm like,
I can tell you this. I'm still trying to understand them. And then
there is so much that you can tell. Okay, can I just jump in the doc and say, because I've shared this with you privately, I've said it here, and I'm still fascinated by it. And I would encourage you all to reflect as long and as hard as you can, and to describe how you transition from identifying and taking the emoluments and privileges of being white. And you decided to align yourself to become accomplices in something that is so downgraded, which is what Doc's narrative is that the trauma and the egregiousness of the wrong is monumental, it's archetypal. And what you've done is you've broken through that. So you have a message for white America that will stop them in their tracks and make them look at their racism in a very, very compelling way that will really shake them up. So I encourage you to journal, speak.
Oh, that's why we have
that's
That's why you have avant-garde, but I mean,
that double consciousness to become a single government, but you got to
I know, but in this context, what I'm saying is with the Asian engagement in the Asian testimony, it's more than one. You have a multiplier effect because what you've done is said that who you are in this civilization is a matter of choice. We have chosen our identity, social identity, based on critique. And it is possible to give up the advantages of identifying with whiteness and that the benefits are worthwhile. When I came to preschool and I saw what had emerged here, I could not believe it, and I'm still processing. And I encourage you not to let go of it.
That was never an option.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe
Yes,
we
it
can-
is.
It's trials and
It's called
tribulations.
We should end
tribulation
this.
because I know the people that are your friends and associates, I know they whisper, talk
Trying
about
to be
you.
blunt.
I'm certain, because of how I know white folks are. And so, I approach.
Well, okay, maybe for this week, because it's 2:15, we can end, but I think we'll continue our theorizing of democracy, I think. And I think there's a lot in your intro, Doc, that actually we didn't completely get to. That would be I actually think it'd be worth returning to, but we can talk about
I'm
that.
sorry I missed y'all.
No, it's on YouTube.